Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm gonna start a new series, What If Deku Fell in Love with Pinky, Part 1. If you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
The sun was setting over UA on a warm summer evening. High school. As their classes concluded for the day, students began to trickle out of the gates. Today was the last day of finals for many, including those in the hero program. As they departed, some were applauding, reveling in their release from the labor. Others just appear worn out, ready to get home and fall asleep. In any case, there was no doubt that the conclusion of finals had calmed everyone down. Almost everyone, actually. Mina Ishido sat by herself in classroom 1A, which is either famous or notorious, depending on who you ask. She was a little slouched forward in her chair, staring at her desk with her head cocked downward. The pink hero in training was notorious for being among the first pupils to leave the classroom when the bell rang, so it was undoubtedly a strange sight. But here she was, sitting motionless while her classmates were all leaving for the day. She hadn't been expelled only because their practical exams were held in a different area of the building today and there hadn't been any actual homeroom instruction. Mina had failed the exam. The reason she was sitting here with an equally blank expression on her face while gazing at a blank desk. One more peculiarity in her conduct. Everyone was aware that Mina might be the class's most emotional and expressive student. Everyone was aware of her emotions, whether they were joy, sorrow, or rage. Her face, however, was unreadable at the moment. Without feeling anything at all. Staring at her desk as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world, she had forgotten how long she had been sitting here. Nor did she care all that much. All she could think about was the test she had failed a short time ago. That was a spectacular failure. In her opinion, this school's history may not have seen a more complete failure. Yes, Hiroshima and Sato had also failed, but at least they appeared to have a chance. They didn't just run like fools the entire test without ever seeing their opponent. At least, despite their stubbornness, they had a plan. In contrast, Mina and Kaminari appeared utterly pitiful. Mina didn't hold her partner responsible, his peculiarity was just not appropriate for the work they were doing. As you can see, Mina's feelings were bad for more reasons than just her exam failure. Yes, it undoubtedly had an impact because it meant she would no longer be attending the training camp she had been anticipating. It also meant that tonight at home, she would have a very fun conversation. She could get over all of that, though. No. She felt like she was going to throw up after watching everyone else's performance in the finals. All of them, Todoroki and Yaoyorozu, Tsuyu and Tokiyami, Kota and Jiro, had given outstanding performances. In one way or another, their technique, strategy, and teamwork had helped them all defeat their teachers. For the first time in his life, Mineta even displayed some resolve. And Mina was thrilled, even ecstatic, for all of them. It was amazing to see how much her classmates had grown during the semester. However, it also demonstrated how far behind Mina had slipped. Mina Ishido, ranked 19th out of 20 students, was starting to worry that she might be pushed to 20th on this test because of how much faster Kaminari had mastered the material during their group study sessions at Yaoyorozu's. The student with the record for after-school detention with Mr. Aizawa was Mina Ishido. Mina Ishido, the young woman who was starting to wonder why she was here. Seriously, what am I doing here? Sighed the horned girl. Without a doubt, this exam had been a huge wake-up call. Even though she was attending the best school for heroes in the nation, she felt as though she had not changed at all after just one semester. Yes, she did survive the villain attack at the USJ, but everyone else was responsible for her survival. She was pretty sure she was the only one who hadn't engaged in combat. Although she did place fairly high at the sports festival, this was primarily due to the fact that she followed Bakugo to the top 16 and coincidentally faced the one opponent whose weakness she was fully aware of in the first round. Apart from that, a lengthy list of unsuccessful tests, competitions, and assignments, spending time at arcades rather than working. Pretending that she belonged here, she chose to hang out with her diligent classmates rather than catch up on her studies. Yeah, pretending. As she sat here thinking about all of this, Mina had started to suspect that UA wasn't where she belonged. Although her acid quirk was undoubtedly potent, she was by no means an ideal student at this esteemed institution for the finest of the best. That was made abundantly evident by this disastrous final. Mina sighed again, buried her face in her hands, and rested her elbows on the desk. Perhaps she burst into tears, but she had had enough of that today. She was simply disappointed. She wasn't even that depressed. She was disappointed in herself. She remained motionless when she heard the door open and close, and when she heard footsteps coming slowly toward her. A hesitant male voice spoke, one she instantly recognized, and she finally moved them. Ashido. His voice was clearly worried. Her expression remained unchanged as she slowly raised her head to face the voice's origin. Midoriya. Just a few minutes before. Eager to get home, Izuku Midoriya yawned as he made his way through the UA hallways. Although he loved this school and was thankful for the opportunity to attend every day, he was exhausted from these finals. Working with his friend who had turned into a bully and fighting a teacher was difficult enough, but what if that teacher was All Might? It was ridiculous even with those training weights. It was one of the many occasions he began to doubt this school's methods of instruction. But there was a reason this place was the best, and he had won in the end. Together, he and Kachan had managed to defeat All Might and pass somehow. He became aware of how much he had changed since beginning here. He had gained a great deal of control over One for All, but he still had a long way to go before he could call it his own. A rare emotion for the quirk inheritor, he couldn't help but feel a little proud of himself. However, as usual, he soon discovered that he was thinking about others more than himself. Not all of his classmates had been as lucky as he was. 4 of them would not be attending the training retreat because they failed the practical final. He could only speculate as to how Kirishima, Sato, Kaminari, and Ashido were feeling. Ashido. His thoughts strayed to the moment he got back from his test. Everyone, including those who hadn't passed their own tests, had watched and was eager to congratulate him. Although they were pleased for him, they were unable to conceal their own disappointment with the outcome. Izuku had noticed Ashido in particular because he wasn't used to seeing her in such a depressed state. She was almost always smiling, and if she was genuinely upset, she usually reacted with a very short but humorously exaggerated reaction. But this was different. Izuku could tell something was wrong, even though she was obviously trying to hide it. He had been told to go down to the nurse's office before he could say anything important. As he pondered this aloud, Izuku rubbed his chin. Luckily, there was no one in the hallway to hear his distinctive mumbling. Everyone else in his class had left for home by the time he left the nurse's office, and he was eager to follow suit. The once quirkless boy was distracted from his digression as he walked past his homeroom by a sudden flash of pink in the corner of his eye. He took a few steps back to peer through the window of the door. Mina Ashido was the one who caused the aforementioned pink flash. The student's eyes widened slightly as he got a closer look at his classmate. "What's she doing in there?" "Huh?" he asked. Although he had previously sensed something strange about her, this was. He nearly failed to identify her. She had lost all of her normal energy. She sat perfectly still at her seat, slumped forward with her head cocked down, her face appearing emotionless. No sobbing, no rage, nothing at all. Izuku was somewhat frightened. He looked at the acid user and muttered, "How long has she been here?" She moved abruptly after a few seconds when he put her elbows on the desk and lifted her arms, allowing her face to drop into his hands. Izuku gave a small grimace when he became aware that he was beginning to notice something strange about her behavior. He was all too familiar with her appearance, body language, and mannerisms. This was the expression of a person who was totally defeated. Someone who was surrendering. Izuku had experienced that feeling more times than he could recall, whether it was the day he learned he wouldn't have a quirk, the times in middle school when he would give in to the taunts of his peers, or the more cynical All Might he had first encountered telling him that he couldn't be a hero without a quirk. Seeing someone else go through that suffering, especially someone like Mina, was something he never wanted to happen again. Izuku clenched his hands into fists. Seeing her in this state was unbearable to him. The green-haired boy opened the creaking door and closed it behind him as he walked into the room. Since he had first met Mina, he had never spoken to her more than a few words, but that was irrelevant at the moment. He walked over to her desk, but she didn't look up. "Ashido," he exclaimed. As he slowly raised her head to him, the horned girl appeared to react. "Midoriya." Mina's voice lacked its typical vigor and vivacity, much like her face. She looked at him blankly and said nothing else. Izuku stumbled, unsure of what to say at the moment. What are you doing in here?" "School is over, why you know," he said. In addition, he still felt a little uncomfortable approaching girls. "Oh." The two stared at one another for a moment before there was a brief pause. Izuku needed to say something, but he knew the answer to the question. Is everything alright? Another one-word response. Yep. Are you sure? Mina closed her eyes this time, taking a deep breath. Yes, I'm sure. Everything's fine, Midoriya. Mina's voice carried a hint of annoyance, which Izuku didn't typically hear from her. He took a step back and lifted his hands a little. The inheritor of One for All was unaware that he was among the last individuals Mina desired to see at this time. His was the exam that had really brought home to her how far behind she had fallen out of all the others. Bakugo and Midoriya, the two most incompatible students in the class, facing the world's greatest hero. Unfeasible, huh? Well, they had accomplished the impossible in some way. Before coming to UA, Bakugo and Midoriya were obviously rivals, but they were able to put aside their differences and cooperate to defeat All Might. All Might, for crying out loud. Additionally, this was the same individual who finished last in the year's first quirk test. The man whose limbs were broken by the use of his power. Even though he was disabled, he was now among the best in the class and could compete head-to-head with All Might, the formidable force. She was angry just thinking about it. Midoriya, not at it, but at herself. He truly didn't know when to back off. Look, if you want to talk about the exam. Mina jumped to her feet and exclaimed, I said I was fine, okay. At this, Izuku leapt back, putting his hands up even higher. Her arms were trembling a little as she screamed at her classmate, her hands clenched into fists. What, you think I'm upset about failing this stupid test and not going to this stupid retreat? Izuku merely gaped at the unexpected display of emotion. Mina closed her eyes and sighed after a few more seconds, feeling a little more at ease. He was not at fault for this. She shouldn't be reacting to him in this manner. Her voice was much lower now. I'm sorry. With another sigh, Izuku lowered his hands slowly. She forced a smile and said, I know you're just trying to help. That's what you do, right? A forced, melancholy smile. Izuku blinked, unclear of her meaning, as she said, always butting into people's business whether they want you to or not. Always helping everyone out, always striving to be the best hero you can be. As she looked down, her smile faded slightly. Seriously, amazing how strong you've gotten. How strong everyone's gotten. It's been one hell of a semester, hasn't it? She said. Izuku was beginning to make sense of it. He began to say, why you've gotten way stronger too, Ashido. He started to say something else, but she shook her head and held up a hand. She laughed softly, hollowly, come on, Midoriya, you saw me out there right? Her smile was becoming less and less convincing. Couldn't even find my opponent. Spend the whole damn thing running like an idiot. Some hero I am, huh? She said. That's me, bottom of the barrel of Class 1A, right? Izuku realized it was more than just the test. He was aware that Mina generally struggled academically, but she never seemed to mind. However, it appeared that the practical had altered that. Look, you, Ashido. She was no longer paying attention to him when he said, you, though, you were incredible. You really did manage to control your strange quirk and get Bakugo to cooperate with you. And you defeated All Might. She gave him a shoulder pat, which caused him to stiffen up a little. You're incredible. Izuku stood motionless as she walked past him and headed for the door, saying, you truly do belong at this school. He whispered, I belong here. Unlike you. Are you attempting to say that? Izuku closed his eyes tightly, gritting his teeth, realizing that she had stopped moving and that she had briefly rubbed her eye without turning to face him. She went on without responding, placing a hand on the doorknob. I had no quirks. Izuku took a moment to realize what he had blurted out, and Mina froze, the doorknob half turned, slowly turning to face her classmate with a look of complete bewilderment on her face. He didn't say exactly what he wanted to. Bakugo had called him a quirkless loser a few times in front of the class, so he had prepared a cover story in case this topic ever came up. He took a deep breath and collected himself. Mina was now fully turned around, her hand off the doorknob. My quirk, he began, glancing at his hand, didn't always have it. It didn't appear until I was done with middle school, actually. The hero in training looked at his feet, partly because he felt bad about lying, but mostly because he was bringing up unpleasant memories. It was rough growing up thinking that. It wasn't a lie, technically. So, I've spent most of my life thinking I was quirkless. Though she wasn't sure if she had ever met one. At least one she knew for sure was quirkless. Mina could only imagine how little society valued quirkless people, who were sometimes treated like second-class citizens because no one believed they would achieve anything in life. Was Izuku treated the same way? Being a hero has always been my dream. I persisted in trying even after I was informed that I would never acquire a quirk. Heroes are never supposed to give up, right? I knew it was basically an impossible dream, but, he looked up, his face now more determined. Of course, no one else believed in me back then, he said, causing Mina's eyes to widen a little. I didn't really have any friends, and many kids enjoyed making fun of me. Who wants to hang out with a quirkless loser, after all? Strange loser. Bakugo had called Midoriya that more than once, Mina had heard. Like many others, she hadn't given it much thought. After all, Bakugo said a lot of shit. However, upon hearing this, it became evident that the two were acquainted prior to UA. Did he mention any bullies, including Bakugo? Once more, her hands clenched into fists. Bullies were the one thing she detested the most. They were essentially young villains who preyed on the weak and defenseless. In her early years, Mina had confronted numerous bullies. It was among the factors that had inspired her to become a hero. Her quirk was something she had always taken for granted. Her life would never have been the same without it. Everyone she knew had quirks, after all. If she didn't have a hero, she couldn't imagine ever considering becoming one. Nobody without a quirk could possibly think that, in her opinion. But Izuku Midoriya, the student who continued to shock the entire class with amazing feats, whether it be pushing Todoroki to the brink at the sports festival, surviving an encounter with the infamous hero killer, or of course besting All Might in his final exam, had. He obviously never gave up on becoming a hero, despite the fact that it sounded like he had been denigrated by everyone for the majority of his life. Everyone understood that heroes were essentially his life. His voice was growing louder and louder as he spoke, his stutter long gone. But despite that, I just couldn't give up. There were times when I felt like I should, but then I would remember All Might's words, and how a hero needs to smile, even when things look bad. He said. All power. Everyone knew that Izuku admired the man. The personification of justice and peace, who never failed to smile no matter what. All around the world, he gave people hope. Mina's hands relaxed and her gaze fell to the ground. Even without a quirk, Izuku continued to dream. Continued to smile. What did he do? In such a hopeless situation, how could he have any hope? Izuku said, but I couldn't do it forever, as his voice became a little quieter. When Mina looked up and saw that Izuku was now staring at the floor, she said, I hit a point in my life where I just couldn't smile anymore. After years of hearing everyone telling you that you can't do something, it gets to you, you know. She could tell by the look on his face that he was recalling some unpleasant memories. I was ready to just fall down and give up. I would never become a hero. Why? He was telling her all of this, but why? They hardly knew one another at all. Why was he revealing so much about himself? He went on, but then, someone caught me, once more meeting her gaze. The fierce, determined look returned to his eyes as he said, someone told me, despite as absurd as it sounded, that yes, I could become a hero, quirk or no quirk. Technically, he wasn't lying when he said, and if it weren't for that person, I probably wouldn't be here today. Even though it turned out I did have a quirk in the end. The reason he held out his arms was, I'm telling you all this, because, he yelled, I'm here to be the one to catch you. I know it's hard accepting failure, but you shouldn't just give up. Mina was speechless. Since the altercation with Todoroki, she had not witnessed Izuku acting so fervently. And it was because of her that he was so fired up. Mina thought he might be saying it to lift her spirits, but he sounded so sincere when he said, I honestly think you're one of the strongest students in our class. Since he was, even though Mina hadn't had much opportunity to demonstrate her fighting skills, Izuku had always respected them. Additionally, she might have had one of the class's most potent quirks. Since her acid made melee attacks nearly impossible, he was genuinely thankful he had never had to face her at the sports festival. He honestly had no idea how he would have a chance. You might be behind now, but that just means you have to work harder than everyone else. He yelled. During the first few days of class, when he had no control over One for All, he had to tell himself those words repeatedly. Mina finally said, echoing his words, work harder. She gave Izuku a look. The individual who entered UA, initially unable to punch without breaking his arm, he received 0 combat points on his entrance exam. He was now among the best students in terms of both grades and fighting skills. Izuku Midoriya, the man who never gave up on his objective in spite of being purportedly quirkless. As Mina's eyes closed tightly and her hands clenched into fists once more, her entire body tensed. How on earth was she doing this? Izuku remained one of the most motivated students in the class despite everything that had happened to him. And she's really thinking about quitting school because she didn't pass the midterm. She placed her hands on her hips, stood up, and gave Izuku a look as determined and ferocious as the one he had been giving her. You're right, I do need to work harder. How can I be a hero if I'm gonna run away the second things get bad? Her face broke into a smile. A real Mina Ashido smile, not just another manufactured one. She chuckled and said, really, I have no idea what I was thinking. Mina appeared to be back to her normal, upbeat self in a flash. Relieved that his conversation had truly been effective, Izuku returned the smile. Just, wow, I had no idea you had gone through all that. Izuku was also reverting to his more reserved, everyday self when he said, well, it's something I really like talking about. The type that still found it difficult to even approach girls. Mina couldn't contain her laughter at his abrupt change in attitude. Her yellow-black eyes blinked as she said, well, thank you. You don't know how badly I needed to hear that. Well, I guess you did. The two exchanged silent looks for a short while. As they calmed down, Izuku became aware that he was standing in the classroom by himself with a girl he hardly knew. Oh, don't mention it, Ashido. Mina laughed once more as his stammering grew worse. Izuku's cheeks began to warm up. Call me Mina. His cheeks were now becoming very hot. The two students jumped when a third voice asked, are you two finished? Mr. Aizawa was standing in the now open doorway when Mina turned around. Both students blushed at this point. Seriously, I could hear your shouting from my office. We're locking up, so you two need to head home. Together, Izuku and Mina exclaimed, yes sir, and hurried out of the classroom. They had gained knowledge by obeying their homeroom teacher's instructions. Izuku let out a sigh and began walking toward the school's exit. It had been quite the day, and he was eager to get home and sleep now more than ever. Something warm suddenly slammed into him, causing his whole body to go rigid. It took him a moment to realize that Mina had practically thrown him into a fervent embrace. A hug. They were hugging Izuku. A girl was embracing Izuku. The green-haired boy's whole body turned bright red, making him feel as though he was on fire. Who? Bu. Izuku opened his mouth to say something, but his brain was having trouble processing what was happening at the moment. A gentle, appreciative voice said, thank you, in his ear prior to his release. He was able to turn to face Mina, who was grinning at him with an even more innocent grin than usual. I mean it, you really are an incredible guy, Izuku. As she left, he was still trying to comprehend what had happened. He didn't feel like he could move for a few more seconds. Did she call him Izuku, I wonder? Hey, Midoriya. Izuku heard Aizawa's voice before his brain shut down again. The erasure user was still standing there, staring at him when he turned around. Snap out of it and get a move on already. Izuku literally ran off after exclaiming, why yes sir. His fear of upsetting his teacher outweighed his embarrassment. Aizawa sighed as he watched his pupil run. He said, those two really are trouble. Nevertheless, a tiny smile came to his face. He had observed Mina's behavior earlier today, just like Izuku. Additionally, he had observed that Izuku had taken notice. After class, he planned to speak with the pink-haired acid user, but for some reason, he felt that Izuku would handle it for him. Mina had undoubtedly been a challenging student, but Aizawa saw her potential and said, nice going, kid. To succeed, she simply needed a bit more motivation. And Izuku was the one who could give her that. Aizawa's logical deceptions were starting to bore Mina. That's not to say she wasn't overjoyed when her homeroom teacher declared that everyone, regardless of test scores, would be attending the training camp. Naturally, when it was revealed that the exam flunkies would be receiving more remedial training, which, as Aizawa essentially threatened, would be even more taxing than summer school, their cheers were swiftly cut off. That news, however, didn't bother Mina as much as she had anticipated. The fact that she had indeed fallen to the lowest class grade did not bother her as much either. All of them had passed the written tests, but Kaminari had, as she had anticipated, received a higher score than she had, passing her by a narrow margin. All of this would have devastated most students. However, for some reason, it only increased Mina's desire to better herself. Izuku had said yesterday, that just means you have to work harder than anyone else. And the pink girl could still clearly remember it. His speech had still given her a boost, and learning that she would have more work to do only strengthened her resolve to succeed. She knew it was for her own benefit, but she was certain that once the remedial training really began, she would soon be changing her mind. However, that had not yet occurred. She had more pressing concerns for the time being, like the shopping trip the class took. Although Mina had previously visited the Kiyoshi Ward shopping mall, it was evident that some of her classmates were doing so for the first time. As her classmates stared at the mall and remarked on its size and layout, she couldn't help but smile. To them, it was an entirely new experience, but to Mina, it was nothing special at this point. Izuku was one of them. Mina was not shocked. The man didn't seem like a particularly gregarious type, considering his personality. Hearing that he had never been somewhere like this was even less shocking now that she was aware of his difficult upbringing. Recalling some of the conversation from yesterday, she scowled. She was horrified that anyone would make fun of someone like Izuku. He never bothered anyone, and he seemed like such a nice and considerate person. On the other hand, he was likely so meek and shy because he had been bullied so much. Calling him meek might have sounded impolite, but it was essentially the reason Mina had never engaged in meaningful conversation with him. He was easy to overlook due to his quiet demeanor, and he appeared to make a conscious effort to blend in whenever possible. He even looked plain, in his current attire of sweatpants and a t-shirt. She didn't feel bad about, for want of a better term, ignoring him because he appeared to have made good friends with some of their other classmates. However, that changed yesterday. Although Izuku had previously displayed that more audacious side of himself, Mina had been forced to reconsider her perception of him after witnessing it directed at her. She felt a kind of admiration for him that had not existed before, not that she had a bad opinion of him. She wanted to learn more about him as a result. In addition, he appeared to be totally disoriented here. He was going to require a guide as everyone was dispersing, and he couldn't help but feel that she owed him for everything he had done the day before. She went up to the bewildered-looking student who was mumbling to himself as he tried to orient himself. "Yo, Midoriya," she said, smiling. Izuku turned to her quickly, obviously a little taken aback by the unexpected appearance of the acid quirk user. His face flushed when he realized it was Mina. Compared to her school uniform, Mina's black, pinky, shirt and jeans shorts were a little more revealing. And he was still thinking about that close call at the end of their talk. He stammered, "Oh, hey, Ashido," and quickly turned his head away. At this response, Mina arched an eyebrow. "I said you can call me Mina," she reminded him. "Alright, sorry." Mina's confusion over his behavior persisted. She was aware of his shyness, but not to this degree. Additionally, he spoke with her yesterday without any issues. She immediately remembered how she had parted ways with him yesterday. She broke into a smile. That clarified a lot. Apparently, Izuku was still thinking about her unexpected hug attack. Hey, I'm not gonna tackle you again, so calm down." She shouldn't be shocked, though, because he had become so red from that she might have thought he was her long-lost cousin or something. She was just excited and thought that the best way to thank her classmate for everything he did was to give him a hug, so she hadn't meant to embarrass him. Even so, it was a pleasant bonus. To put it mildly, it was amusing to watch him so agitated. He also looked incredibly adorable as a result. Izuku turned back to Mina, his face returning to normal before Mina could fully comprehend that final thought. That's not, I mean, did you need something?" She threw her arms out in a pose, saying, "I just figured you might want someone to show you around, and I just so happen to be quite the expert on all things Kiyoshi." Izuku glanced back at his pink classmate after taking another look around the enormous mall. Indeed, he had no idea where he was heading, and he had a long list of things he would need. Although Mina would be very helpful, Izuku didn't want to cause trouble. Additionally, going out by himself with a girl he hardly knew. Izuku's cheeks began to warm up once more. Mina teased, "Sheesh, you're acting funny today," which made him blush even more. Izuku closed his eyes and inhaled deeply before asking, "What happened to that Midoriya I was talking to yesterday?" She was correct. He needed to relax. She was merely a classmate offering to give him a tour. He said, "Sorry, and thank you, but I don't want to be a burden. Without me, you can probably cover more ground. Mina rolled her eyes and said, really, are you certain that you and the guy the first spoke with yesterday are the same person? It's okay, I don't mind showing you around. She crossed her arms. Besides, after everything you told me, I'd think of us as friends, wouldn't you? And if I abandoned you out here, what sort of friend would I be? Although it was true that he had said some rather intimate things to her, things he hadn't even discussed with his other friends, Izuku was surprised to hear this girl, with whom he had essentially just recently begun a conversation, refer to him as her friend. Admittedly, she had been on his mind since last night, so he wouldn't mind getting to know her a little better, but that's not to say he didn't appreciate it. The inheritor of Quirk gave a nod. All right, let's move forward. Mina abruptly grabbed Izuku's wrist and started walking quickly, dragging him along before he could respond. Wait, the feeling of her hand on his arm quickly made Izuku's blush return. Wait, Ashido. Mina, she corrected him, looking back with one of her trademark grins. Now come on. Before I do that, I'll show you one of my favorite clothes stores. As the excited girl listed off store after store, Izuku sighed in frustration, wondering what he had gotten himself into. They slowly stood up and started to follow the two teenagers as they headed to an escalator, neither of them noticing a hooded figure watching their conversation. As it turned out, Izuku had gotten himself into a pretty good time. Although it took him a little while to get over his typical awkwardness, Mina soon had him talking about a wide range of subjects as they grew closer. They talked about their quirks, families, school, hobbies, and much more as they went from store to store. They had been able to carry on a conversation for almost an hour at this point. Clearly, Mina's seemingly boundless energy was infectious. Although they were very different personalities, they had more in common than they realized, especially when it came to heroes. Izuku's complete obsession with all things hero was unmatched by anyone, but Mina came surprisingly close. It had been a long time since he could talk about things like hero comics in such detail without receiving strange looks. Ultimately, though, All Might escaped the grip and knocked the villain out with a single blow. Izuku described one of the many All Might comics he had read with excitement. Yes, it was fantastic. Detroit was all he was saying, and then, bam. I still can't believe you named all your moves after his, Mina said, smirking as she thrust a fist outward while holding a bag full of camping supplies in her other hand. You're such a fanboy, she said, putting on her best All Might impression. Of course, most All Might stories ended similarly, but that didn't make them any less entertaining. Izuku smiled sheepishly and rubbed the back of his head, saying, hey. Maybe a little. Just a bit, you really adore the man, so come on. As she poked at an All Might patch on his backpack and teased him, she laughed. Izuku quickly tried to cover up the patch to hide his blush, but this just made Mina laugh more, which made the All Might fan feel even more embarrassed. Izuku also quickly discovered that his new friend loved to tease him, always. They couldn't go 5 minutes without her saying something that made him feel this way. Why, you're having a great time, aren't you? As he composed himself, Izuku asked. Yes, I am. Mina's smile expanded, but it was abruptly cut short when she realized something. Hey, this isn't bothering you, is it? Izuku gave her a perplexed look and said, you realize that I'm not teasing you or anything. The horned girl had become so engrossed in their conversation that she momentarily forgot Izuku's story from yesterday, in which he was ridiculed and teased by his peers for a significant amount of his life, and her voice suddenly became worried. What? Oh no, no. Izuku waved his hands in front of him and said, I know you don't mean any of it. He acknowledged that there was a stark difference between her lighthearted remarks and the hurtful taunts Bakugo and his other former bullies would hurl. To be honest, I'm kinda glad you're doing it, he said. Yeah, all the joking made him nervous, but he didn't want Mina to treat him differently because of his past. After all, he had been treated strangely by everyone for the majority of his life. He smiled at her, and Mina understood right away. He didn't want her to think he was weak, and she didn't, of course. Instead, she thought he was one of the toughest, bravest people in the class, if not the most so. He was definitely more brave than she was. If she had been in his position, she would have given up on becoming a hero long ago. Izuku Midoriya was one strange guy, but it was kind of funny to think that a man with a will as strong as his could be so easily tripped up by a few stupid remarks. Hey, those are UA pupils. A bystander cut them off in their tracks. Yes, I believe I know who they are. From the sports festival, Class 1A. The students mentioned earlier turned to see a small group of people approaching them as another voice cried out. Mina turned to face her countrymen and said, "More fans. I guess that's just one of the many benefits of being a UA." A student, EH. A number of other people had also noticed them. "Yeah, perks," Izuku grudgingly replied, clearly grateful for the compliment, but dealing with all these admirers was difficult due to his awkwardness. The two celebrities spoke to the group for a few minutes, took pictures, and even signed a few autographs. Naturally, Izuku was receiving the most attention, with most of the audience commenting on his fight with Todoroki, which was understandable given that the fight was likely the event's high point, even more so than the finals. Naturally, this only served to highlight Izuku's awkwardness around strangers, as he found it difficult to communicate with everyone. When Mina signed a child's notebook, she laughed because he was so adorable. She blinked, and it reappeared. It wasn't like she'd ever thought of him like this, so where was this coming from? With a great sigh of relief, Izuku slumped his shoulders as the fans dispersed. How do experts deal with this on a daily basis, man? He appeared positively exhausted and asked no one in particular. The cost of being famous, huh? Mina pushed her elbow against his arm, saying, "You shouldn't be so shocked." Izuku glanced at her and said, "As I mentioned earlier, you're pretty amazing. It's no wonder you're so popular with everything you pulled off at the festival." They stared at each other in silence for a few moments, and for some reason, hearing that from her made the one-for-all wielder feel fuzzy. He could not help but smile himself, and his face warmed up again as he looked at her smiling face. Izuku was drawn to his companion's eyes for some reason, and he could see so much emotion in them as he looked into them. They radiated with that passion that the pink-haired hero in training was known for, and those black and yellow orbs had always fascinated the boy since he first saw Mina. They were stunning. "Hello." Izuku was awakened by the snapping of fingers. "Earth to Midoriya, come in Midoriya." Izuku's eyes widened as he realized that Mina's fingers in front of his face were the source of the snapping. How much time did he spend looking at her like that? His face flushed. "Oh, I apologize, I was." The human tomato hybrid was having trouble speaking. What were we discussing? Mina chose to attribute her friend's actions to the nerves he was likely still experiencing from the fans. "I said I was going to use the little girl's room. Will you mind waiting here? I'll be back shortly." Oh. As he gradually started to cool down, Izuku replied, "Yeah, and no problem." Mina left him to go about her business, leaving him standing alone, and Izuku started to wonder, what was that about just now? I'd never thought that kind of stuff about someone before, especially not their eyes. However, the more he thought about it, the more he began to acknowledge that she was actually pretty. Oh, where was all this coming from, Mineta? Was he really this awkward around girls? But why didn't he ever think about Uraraka like that? He yelled both mentally and vocally. "You're a UA, wow. Youngster, huh, Class 1A. A man's voice shook the flustered boy out of his thoughts. "Wow, awesome. Would you mind signing your name? Hey, aren't you that guy who got all banged up by the ice kid at the sports festival?" Izuku sighed. Not exactly in the mood to deal with more fans right now. The same voice continued, abruptly getting closer. Abruptly, an arm was thrown around Izuku's neck, causing his entire body to go rigid. "Ah, yes, that's me." The anxious boy began to perspire a little. This guy didn't understand the concept of personal space. And wait, didn't you also encounter Stain, that hero killer guy? The man went on, and Izuku felt as though he recognized his voice. "Yeah, sir. Why, you truly know what you're doing." Why was he suddenly feeling uneasy? "Dude, you're truly amazing." The voice abruptly became more sinister. "And to think, I'd be meeting you again here of all places." Hold on, once more. What did he mean by? When the hand that was hanging loosely over his shoulder suddenly grabbed his neck, Izuku let out a little cry. Fate or something must be to blame. "I suppose you last saw me at the UA, but it seems like you're having a hard time remembering." Invasion, EH. Midoriya Izuku. When the UA student realized what was happening, his blood froze. He recognized the hand, the voice, and the USJ. Even without the hand covering his smiling face, the young hero in training knew exactly who he was looking at. The frightful leader of the League of Villains, who had almost killed both Izuku and All Might that day, and he slowly turned to see his face. Shigaraki Tamura. Izuku glanced around wildly, but no one had seemed to notice him. "Be natural," Child, you understand that we're just old friends catching up. The villain muttered, I just want to talk to you for a little while. Yeah, a pleasant, friendly conversation. Shigaraki started to move, bringing his prisoner along. And don't even consider doing anything amusing. Because you know what will happen the moment you do, don't you? Izuku swallowed. Shigaraki's hand was currently clamped around his neck, excluding one finger. You'll begin to crumble from the skin down the moment all of my fingers touch you. Shigaraki hissed, you'll be nothing but dust in a minute. Izuku instantly remembered witnessing this monster's peculiar behavior against Aizawa. With difficulty, Izuku said, but if you do, you know, a hero I in this sea crowd will catch you. Naturally, they will, but look around, kid. The League of Villains. Master motioned to the ignorant throng surrounding them, saying, almost everyone here has a peculiarity that could easily cause harm to others. But none of them appear to be scared. Why? Since they believe that everyone will follow the same laws as them. He laughed and said, I could probably kill 20 or 30 people before someone stopped me. He hoped that no one would attack so abruptly. He leaned in close to Izuku's ear and said, anyone I wanted, really. His next words were laced with hate. Like that pink girlfriend of yours, for instance. Had he been following them all along? The captive's eyes widened as wide as they could. He had a flashing vision of Mina falling apart. Ashido. He wasn't in the right frame of mind to consider the girlfriend remark at all. Ashido. What a lovely name. A pretty girl with a pretty name. Mr. Hero. We wouldn't want to worry about her right now, would we? Izuku's face turned white as Shigaraki's smile grew, and they both fell silent for a while. What would you like to discuss? Izuku realized that he would have to comply and either wait for an opportunity or hope that this madman would truly spare his life. That's the essence. Let's find a nice, quiet place, shall we? Shigaraki laughed again, his laugh hollow and dry. Mina came out of the bathroom and wiped her hands on her shirt. She complained, seriously, all this advanced technology nowadays, and we still can't get hand dryers that actually work, and checked her phone, saying, crap. She had been alone with Izuku for about 15 minutes, and shortly after that, she had been jumped by a few more groups of fans. I hope he's not too annoyed. Her shopping companion didn't come across as impatient, but she still felt bad. Luckily, she didn't encounter any more speed bumps on the way back, and she hurried back to where she had left Izuku, searching for her green-haired friend, who she initially didn't see. Midoriya, this is the right place, isn't it? She started to walk around, pausing to look at the surrounding stores, assuming he had wandered into one while he was waiting for her. She didn't see him. What the devil? As she folded her arms, Mina's brows knitted slightly as she wondered where the boy might have gone. Had he gone to the bathroom too, and she simply missed him, or had he gone looking for her because she had taken so long? She didn't think he would just leave her without any explanation. Izuku didn't have the best self-esteem, so it's possible that she had abandoned him. Did he interpret her prolonged absence as a sign that she no longer wanted to spend time with him? It began to seem more plausible the more she considered it. Why didn't I get his number? *T. Exchanging numbers was usually one of the first things she did with a new friend, but for some reason, she had been reluctant to do so with Izuku. She wasn't sure why, but it had prevented her from asking him about it. I asked myself, broadening her search. She had the numbers of Kaminari and Kirishima, so that didn't make sense, even though they weren't as cute as Izuku. Why was that? Because he was a guy or something? Even though she didn't say anything, she slapped her free hand over her mouth. It was there once more. Why did she keep thinking such things? Mina swallowed. She was beginning to notice this sensation, which she hadn't felt in a few years, but this was how a crush usually began for her. Oh no, her face was hot. Was this thing for real? Mina, yo. When Mina heard her name, she instantly put the thought out of her mind and turned to face Kirishima, who waved to her friend with a smile. Hey, horn buddy. The redhead with the spiky hair paused and said, just checking out shops, figuring out what I still need. Really, I can't believe we're going to this camp thing after all. Very sweet, isn't it? Apart from the whole extra lessons thing, Kirishima's excitement was soon replaced by a hint of fear. Oh, stop acting that way. It's already crazy that we're going at all. Yeah, but still, when the hardening quirk user said, I'm kind of looking forward to the extra work, honestly, she gave her friend a second look. What did you do to Mina, and who are you? Are you eager to get to work? he asked. Mina gave an eye roll. Ha ha ha. She pretended to laugh, then her smile vanished. Yeah, I am, she said. She paused. Yesterday I kind of had a moment of introspection. Before Kirishima could ask further, she changed the subject, saying, I realized I need to change the way I look at things. By the way, did you happen to see Midoriya anywhere? The boy with the spiky hair arched an eyebrow. I was supposed to meet up with him again here, but he's not around. What, Midoriya? How long have you been hanging out with him? Mina's eyes squinted slightly. What is the intended meaning of that? Kirishima held up his hands as though in self-defense. Oh, nothing. It's simply unexpected. He wasn't mistaken. But yeah, I think I saw him, Mina said, closing her eyes and letting out a small sigh. You two never really seemed close. At least I assume they're not from the school, Mina said, opening her eyes slightly wider than before. Looked like he ran into a friend from outside school or something. Didn't truly identify them. Mina was distracted by the boys' constant chatter. A friend from outside of school. Izuku had informed her that he didn't actually have any other friends. Suddenly, the junior hero with the pink hair felt uneasy. You saw him where? Her tone was less upbeat than usual as she cut off whatever he was saying. What? Kirishima pointed in a direction and said, oh, he was over that way. Something hey, wait. Mina abruptly started to move quickly in that direction. What's wrong, Mina? She was unable to respond or provide an explanation, but she had a gut feeling that Izuku was in danger. Mina stopped a few minutes later at the top of a staircase that led to a small long area, and she looked around to see if her friend was there. Aha, where are you? She was able to get a side view of both of them because her eyes were fixed on a bench a short distance from the lounge where she saw a familiar green and black hairstyle, Izuku Midoriya sitting on the bench with a tall hooded figure next to him, and the two appeared to be conversing, with the hooded person's right arm around Izuku's shoulder at a perpendicular angle to her own. It didn't seem strange at first, but as Mina kept looking, she saw that Izuku's body language and face were very strange. He was extremely tense, and his eyes would occasionally dart around. His face wasn't the typical awkward, nervous one he frequently wore. The yellow-eyed girl had seen enough of that expression today to know this wasn't it. Instead, it was very different, as if he was afraid of something. As she watched him move his body a little, the figure appeared to react by drawing him a little nearer, but something in the movement told her everything else she needed to know. Izuku felt the hooded person's hand tightening around his throat. There was a lot of reaction from the dozens of people on the stairway when Mina suddenly found herself jumping at the railing of the stairway and using her quirk to slide down it like she was grinding on a skateboard, subconsciously choosing the least strong acid she could muster to make it little more than a green goo. Without a second's hesitation, she slid down the railing and jumped onto the floor below, her body having just started moving on its own without any conscious thought, and she ran toward Izuku's captor, fist ready. What distinguishes the two of you? Izuku asked Shigaraki the same question again. The hooded villain had started his chat after dragging him off to a somewhat remote bench. At first, it was a lot of bullshit about heroes, violence, and society. Izuku assumed it was the ramblings of a madman. He only half listened, desperately trying to find a way out of his predicament. If Shigaraki let his guard down for even a moment. But Izuku's entire focus was on him when the hero killer appeared. It turned out that Stain had not really been a member of the League of Villains, and Shigaraki was upset about his fame. He had been upset that no one was discussing his evil deeds, such as the USJ attack or the Nomu outbreak at Hosu, so he asked Izuku a straightforward question: what was different about Stain from Shigaraki? He remembered Stain's last words before he was vanquished: we were both inspired by All Might. Shigaraki remained silent, which prompted the boy to go on. You're both villains, and you've both done unforgivable things, but the hero killer, I could at least understand him. His desire to kill was not the only reason he did it. Izuku was able to look the leader of the League of Villains in the eye despite his fear and perspiration. I can't condone his actions, but he lived according to an ideal. He even saved my life. Shigaraki was momentarily stunned. Izuku wasted no time in trying to break free, but the villain quickly tightened his hold and drew his prisoner closer. It's all about All Might. Ah, now I get it, he muttered. Why both you and the hero killer get me so pissed off? Izuku felt the fingers digging deeper into his throat. His hand began to tremble a little. He is the cause of everything. All of these people are so content and carefree because of him. His voice was filled with rage, and his fingers dug deeper and deeper until Izuku was having trouble breathing. The boy gave up all tact and started tugging at Shigaraki's arm in an attempt to free himself before the villain went completely crazy. Hey, hello, what are you doing, in your opinion? Hero, did I not warn you what would happen if you tried anything? The madman asked, turning back to Izuku. He moved his last finger slowly down to the boy's throat. His head snapped abruptly to his left, and Izuku looked in that direction. When he saw what had caught Shigaraki's attention, his eyes widened in shock. Give him up. A half-second later, Mina was on the villain, her right fist flying in his face as she screamed and ran full sprint towards him. However, it never made it to its target. Izuku felt his whole body lurch as Shigaraki suddenly leapt to his feet, grabbed the punch with his left hand, and swept his attacker's legs out from under her. Mina landed on her stomach, but before she could react, a shoe dug into her back, pinning her. Shigaraki's hand remained at Izuku's throat, and the color faded from his now standing face. Hey now, that wasn't very nice, the villain said to Mina while continuing to hold her fist. That kind of surprise attack. You consider yourself a hero, too. Mina attempted to break free, but the hold was firm, and Izuku noticed cracks beginning to appear on her hand. No, everything seemed to slow down. As One for All started to activate, Izuku started to reach for the hand around his throat. Shigaraki's grip relaxed because he was preoccupied and needed to escape. He needed to stop this villain. Izuku clutched the hand and tugged, clenching his teeth as more cracks appeared. Izuku felt the hand's hold on his back tighten once more as Shigaraki's head snapped back to his original target, his eyes maniacal. No, he claimed that as his power surged, he felt his throat dry out and that lightning was running through him. Mina's skin was beginning to peel away, exposing muscle and blood beneath. Mina! Izuku screamed and closed his eyes despite the vice-like hold that was now on his neck. He couldn't stand to watch any longer and prepared to use One for All's full force on Shigaraki, regardless of the repercussions. Unexpectedly, Izuku felt himself tumbling backwards, losing the sensation of skin against his throat. He instantly braced and caught himself, panting, and Shigaraki began to back away from him and Mina. He was also screaming in agony. Izuku could see what appeared to be smoke rising from the villain's hand, which was gripping his left hand with his right, and a noxious smell began to fill the boy's nostrils. The villain's scream was so loud that it was deafening. From this vantage point, he could not see Mina sitting up, but he could see a few droplets of greenish liquid falling from it, eating tiny, smoking holes into the floor, holding her right hand against her chest with her left arm. Acid, and a very corrosive one at that. Shigaraki's hand was now being destroyed by the same acid. With his quirk deactivated, he hurried to her, knelt down to eye level, and felt the lightning in his body fade. Mina, she spoke without looking up. Her voice was shaky, as if she was having difficulty even saying the words, "Don't let escape," and she spoke through clenched teeth. Avoidance. Oh, he turned his head quickly. Shigaraki was gone, and Izuku stood looking around wildly for him, barely catching a glimpse of a black hood in the distance before it vanished around a corner. Oh no! Izuku put a hand on the girl's shoulder and turned back to her, knowing there was nothing else he could do. Help is on the way, so everything will be alright. He reassured her. He then managed to see her right hand, which was missing nearly all of its skin from the wrist down, and blood was beginning to seep through her shirt. Mina raised her head and said, "Ah, man." Her eyes were closed, but Izuku could see she was fighting back tears, and she somehow forced a smile despite the obvious pain she was in. This was my favorite shirt. If he hadn't been caught, or if he'd been able to act a little faster, Izuku would have been able to stop the tears from welling up in his eyes. Mina's eyes were wide open now. Hey, don't give me that face. Heroes need to smile, even when things look bad, right? A tear escaped her eye, and although she was still trembling in terror, her smile remained unbroken despite the obvious pain on her face. Yesterday, he had told her the same thing. Izuku used an arm to rub his eyes and made himself smile. You're right, why yeah, they do. Despite his inability to contain his tears, he continued to smile. Just wait, okay. In the distance, sirens could be heard singing. Shigaraki, who had escaped the mall and slipped into an alley before any heroes or law enforcement showed up, leaned against the alley wall to catch his breath, knowing that all he had to do was lay low until the heat was turned off. He winced, the pain still raw, as he looked down at his left hand, which was heavily burned and blistered. His eyes twitched as he glared at the burned hand while using his right hand to scratch at his neck. Who the devil does that fucking pink brat think she is? Mina. He practically spat out the name as he snarled, his entire body trembling, remembering the name Izuku had yelled. Mina Ishido and Izuku Midoriya. I'll make sure it hurts, he said, grabbing at a small trash can next to him with his right hand, which quickly crumbled to dust. I swear, the next time I see either of you. Hospitals never appealed to Mina. Because of her adventurous nature, she had hurt herself numerous times when she was younger. Mina was no stranger to the medical field. She had suffered acid burns when she first used her quirk a little too much, a broken arm after falling from a tree, and a twisted foot after jumping from a swing just too high. The waiting around was the main thing that annoyed her. One of the reasons Mina struggled so much in school was that she wasn't the type to sit still for long periods of time. It was the same today. Mina sat up in her bed and complained, seriously, I have to be here another 2 hours. But I feel fine. At the moment, she was in a hospital room with a cast on her right wrist and hand. Chio Shuzenji, better known as Recovery Girl, her hero, was in the room with her. Even though she was working at UA, in her free time, she regularly volunteered at different clinics and hospitals while working as a nurse. This was one of those times. We need to make sure there aren't any additional effects from that villain's quirk. Besides, you need to rest while your body repairs itself, Recovery Girl said. She had just finished using her healing quirk on the injured student and had only just arrived. Mina began to say, but yawned too soon. All of a sudden, she was extremely sleepy. The woman's obstinate patient collapsed back into bed, moaning in exasperation, and said, like I said before, my quirk speeds up your body's natural healing, which means your stamina will greatly diminish. You need to rest. Recovery Girl reprimanded the girl, waving a finger, saying, if you don't like it, then next time you should think twice about charging into such a dangerous situation. Honestly, you're lucky your injury wasn't worse. Mina raised her head slightly to gaze at the nurse as she said, and what was I supposed to do? Let that asshole do whatever he was going to do to my friend. Language, young lady. Mina averted her gaze, a little intimidated by the older woman's severe expression. Right, sorry, she said. I had to do something. I saw Midoriya was in trouble, and my body just kind of started moving. I wasn't really thinking about my own safety. Recovery Girl let out a sigh. Both quirk users turned their heads when they heard the door open. You sound just like him, you know. Always hurling himself at danger to protect others. When Mina saw who it was, she grinned. Izuku practically ran into the room and exclaimed, Ishido. He appeared to be both extremely relieved and extremely concerned. How are you, Fei-ao? Something struck the back of his head, causing a sharp pain. Recovery Girl started lecturing the boy, jabbing him with her cane. Izuku Midoriya, what do I keep telling you about acting so recklessly? She asked. It was bad enough when you were hurting your own body, but now your self-destructive behavior is starting to rub off on your classmates. She was so upset. No, I didn't. Izuku frantically attempted to explain while thrashing his arms in front of his face. Honestly, I have half a mind too. Mina watched as the normally composed nurse chewed out her classmate. They obviously knew one another quite well. Mina wasn't particularly shocked, considering the nature of Izuku's quirk. Recovery Girl put both hands on her cane and sighed after reprimanding her for about a minute. A hero needs to be willing to risk their lives, I know, but remember you're still just a child. She glanced at Mina. The same goes for you, young lady. Mina nodded, not wanting to provoke the healer's anger. Yes, ma'am. Recovery Girl gave a gentle smile. She said, good, now get some rest, and walked out of the room. After all, Mina wasn't the only patient she needed to see. Izuku, still somewhat shaken by his verbal thrashing, walked over to the left side of the bed. Mina smirked and said, man, she really has it in for you, huh? Hey, she means well, but she's not really a fan of how much I need to see her, Izuku acknowledged. Wincing slightly, he rubbed the back of his head gently. Man, that cane hurts, Mina laughed, causing the boy's cheeks to flush a bit. But he also found himself giggling. After everything they had been through, it was nice to laugh, even though the situation wasn't particularly humorous. Izuku looked at his bedridden friend's cast and his laughter ceased. When Mina saw where he was looking, she also became quiet. Whether they laughed or not, they were still thinking about what had happened at the mall. How is it? Inquired Izuku. This. Mina made a small movement with her right hand. Izuku winced as she remembered how her hand had appeared prior to being taken by ambulance. Well, it still kind of hurts. And it feels really stiff. But it's definitely getting better. Mina had obviously been in a lot of pain, but she put on a tough front at the time. It was a huge relief to hear that things were improving. She gave a yawn. Izuku could infer from her tone that she was exhausted, a side effect of the healing quirk that had been given to her. Recovery Girl's quirk sure is something. Its effects were all too familiar to him. Yeah, it really is. Mina kept staring at her cast, and the two were silent for a few more seconds. It began, that man. Shigaraki, right, his quirk is, she shivered, remembering how her skin seemed to literally crumble beneath her. I guess I'm lucky mine countered it pretty well. She remembered how easily the villain had overpowered her and how fast he had responded and countered her attack. Had her quirk not been able to get him off like that, she would have been no match for him. She glanced up at Izuku, who was now staring at the ground. Silently, I'm sorry, he said. Mina's eyebrows went up. What are you apologizing for? He kept his gaze down and said, for putting you through all that. The green-haired boy began to shake and his hands gripped the side of the bed tightly. For not being able to fight him off. For not being able to stop him from hurting you. Perhaps if I had been a bit quicker. Midoriya. As Mina spoke, he felt a hand grab the top of one of his, and when he looked up, he saw that she was sitting up and staring at him sternly. Don't you dare start blaming yourself for this. It sounded more like an order than anything else, and he remembered that I entered the room like a fool. And this is what I get for not thinking, she said, turning to face her cast. It was, as Recovery Girl said, a foolish, careless move. Then she turned back to Izuku and said, but when I saw you in trouble like that, it was like my body just started moving on its own. And you know what? I'm happy it did, because your life is more important to me than my right hand. Mina's sudden intensity surprised Izuku. So don't go saying sorry to me, Izuku said. I should be the one to apologize if anything for causing you such anxiety. After Mina concluded her speech, there was another pause while she kept her fiery gaze fixed on Izuku. Alright, Sore. Izuku caught himself. Got it, he nodded. But, thank you at least. After all, you saved my life. The wounded girl grinned, her expression softening. Oh, it didn't matter. Izuku said, I know you would have done the same thing for me. She was right, of course, if she had been the one in danger, he would have acted in the same way. He understood her when she said that her body had moved on its own, because he had seen it happen numerous times before and it was a quality that all great heroes shared, according to All Might. Mina was something. Izuku suddenly realized that Mina was holding his hand warmly as he smiled at her, and both of them appeared to notice as they looked down. Izuku's hand was still in Mina's, and both hands had actually moved to the point where their palms were pressed together and their fingers interlocked. Both of them felt their faces burn as soon as they realized what they were doing, and they quickly separated their hands and turned their heads away. I apologize. I have no idea how that has happened. With a squeak, Izuku's tongue felt like putty. Mina wasn't doing much better. Why yeah, same. For a few moments, the room was filled with an overwhelming silence. Whatever the case, I should probably let you rest. As he headed for the door, Izuku managed to say. Why yeah, sounds good. Ashido, see you later. Oh, I mean, Mina, the stuttering boy said, opening the door but pausing in the doorway. See you around, Izuku. He blushed even more when he heard his first name, and he walked out of the room, closing the door behind him. When had their hands done that? Why had their hands done that? Mina sighed loudly as she reclined in her bed. Her thoughts turned back to the earlier part of the day, to all the random thoughts she had been having about Izuku, to all the familiar sensations she had been experiencing. Was Izuku the object of her true crush? The horned girl yawned once more, her eyes heavy, and she was far too exhausted to be thinking about such things at the moment. She allowed herself to fall asleep. So, it's not painful or anything? Kaminari inquired. Mina bit into her food and said, not really, no. So why must you leave it on? Gazing at his friend's hand, Kirishima remarked, seems like a pain. You're telling me, you realize how difficult it is to do anything without my steady hand. Mina indicated her body, saying, I really couldn't even get dressed on my own. However, since it might not have finished healing, I must leave the cast on until tomorrow. The amount of time it takes for all of your hand's skin to regrow will surprise you. Jiro reminded her, we're trying to eat here, with a look of mild disgust on her face. Although the hero course had concluded its finals 2 days prior, some of the other programs still had exams to complete, and although these extra days hadn't been particularly taxing for Class 1A, Mr. Aizawa wasn't one to let his students take it easy. It was the day following the mall incident, and the actual last day of classes for the semester. While the pink-haired girl was still a little shaken by her fight with the villain, she was more than willing to talk about it because she was going to be a hero, after all, and dangerous situations like that were going to be commonplace. Mina was currently having lunch with her usual group of friends, Kirishima, Kaminari, Jiro, and Tsuyu. Like most of the class that day, they had all been discussing her and Midoriya's encounter with Shigaraki, and the injury Mina had suffered as a result. However, a lot had undoubtedly occurred yesterday. When she had slept in the hospital, some police officers had stopped by to ask her about the incident and to give her a quick talk about using her quirk in public. They were willing to allow her to use it to defend herself against her attacker, but it was a little more problematic when she used it to slide down the railing. Since she hadn't actually done any damage, they were willing to let it go, but she had received a severe warning. To be honest, Mina thought the whole situation was absurd. The police were worried that she had soiled a railing, and she and Midoriya might have been killed. Her family had then arrived to take her home, and it had been a wild evening, with her being reprimanded for her impetuous actions, praised for her bravery, and pampered for ultimately being alright. And he was there, of course. Mina found herself staring at the table where Midoriya sat, chatting with Aida, Uraraka, and Todoroki as usual, while her friends were raving about her cast. She sighed to herself as she stared at the boy she had fallen in love with. Mina had indeed been thinking about Midoriya a lot last night after their moment in the hospital room, and even though she had only known him for 2 days, she had come to terms with the fact that she was beginning to feel something for her new friend. She wasn't sure if it was because she was grateful for the compassion he showed her in the classroom that day, because she had heard about his past, or because she just thought he was so damn cute. Mina had a few crushes in the past, but those had been back when she didn't fully understand what they meant, and they had vanished as fast as they appeared. This time, however, Mina wasn't so sure. The thought of it made her giddy. She didn't know what to do, which is why she hadn't approached him to sit with him. In fact, she had stayed away from him for the majority of the day. Hey, are you still here? A hand was waved in front of Mina's face by Kirishima. Well, what? I apologize. I was a little lost out there, wasn't I? Crap, had he seen her? The redhead jokingly said, yeah, and more than usual, as we discussed our summer plans. After all, we had a week before camp. Yes, I intend to spend a lot of time at the beach the following week. Perhaps pick up a hot babe or two, Kaminari grinned. Yes, your entire, drooling idiot, routine will be adored by them. After his brain fried, Jiro added, total chick magnet, giving the electric quirk user her best impression. Oh, please stop talking. He yelled, I'll be going to the gym a lot. After all, a man needs to maintain his physical fitness. Kirishima grinned and gestured with his thumb at himself. I'll most likely be lending a hand at home. Ribbit, Tsuyu croaked, my parents need all the help they can get. This week, I'm actually going to a concert with some old friends. We were seated in the front row for everything. Jiro's voice was full of excitement. Whoa, that sounds fantastic. How about you, Mina? Kaminari asked, turning to face her. The entire table fell silent as they stared at the pink girl, saying, oh, well I was thinking I should catch up on studying. What? Come again? Kaminari's head turned. Yes, what? Jiro nearly seemed worried that something was amiss with her friend. Mina's cheeks turned magenta as Tsuyu said, I think that villain's quirk might have messed with your brain or something. Tsuyu sounded as though she actually believed what she had just said. Is it truly that weird? She looked slightly away from the group and asked, crossing her arms. From you? Yes, it certainly is. Kaminari cried out. I don't even think you have any notes to study with, Tsuyu said, placing a finger on her chin. Everyone laughed, even though Tsuyu knew it wasn't meant to offend her. Kirishima said nothing. Kane, knock it off already, Mina complained. Look, these finals have given me the realization that I need to stop being so lazy. You know, being at the bottom of the class isn't exactly enjoyable. I can understand that. Suyu nodded. Hey Kaminari, perhaps you ought to study as well. Ribbit, you're not doing all that much better than Mina. Hey, don't blame me for this. But, maybe she's got a point, he sighed as the brunette screamed at the frog girl. The bell signaled that lunch was over before the discussion could continue, and the students hurriedly consumed the remainder of their meal before rising to resume class. However, Mina felt a finger tap her shoulder as she entered the hallway, and when she turned around, Hiroshima was standing behind her. Hey, could we have a brief conversation? Izuku took another bite of his rice and yawned, feeling ready to go home even though the day was only halfway over. Midoriya, are you certain you're okay? You don't look well, Aida said, his voice worried. Izuku yawned once more and said, yeah, I'm fine. I just didn't really get a lot of sleep, that's all. Yeah, I'd probably have trouble sleeping too after what you went through, Uraraka said with a scowl. God, I can't imagine how scary that must have been. Todoroki's eyes narrowed as he looked down at the table and remarked, I still can't believe such a high-profile villain was just out in public like that. Any one of us could have been taken by him. It was a disturbing idea. Let's concentrate on the good. After all, Midoriya and Ishido are both fine, Aida reminded his peers. Mina, when the girl was mentioned, Izuku's thoughts began to wander. Even though he had a hard time sleeping after seeing Shigaraki again, it was her that kept the one for all inheritor up last night. He'd been thinking about Mina all day after that awkward moment in the hospital, and even now, the thought of their hands holding each other like that made his chest tighten. Throughout yesterday, Izuku and many others were troubled by the following questions. How long had their hands been like that? Why were they like that? Why did it take so long to notice? He kept finding himself just staring at her, for example, at the mall, when her eyes were practically hypnotizing him, or in the hospital, just before they realized they were holding hands. Or in the cafeteria right now. Izuku realized that ever since this line of thought began, he had been staring at Mina. Feeling a little embarrassed, Izuku turned back to the table quickly. Why did this keep happening? Was this how Mineta began? Was Izuku's incessant staring a sign that he was becoming a gross pervert? He had so little experience with girls. Perhaps this was just a normal thing. Perhaps all guys secretly thought this stuff. Deku. Oh, Izuku jumped as he felt someone tap his shoulder. Uraraka pulled her hand back, a bit surprised by his reaction. Todoroki and Aida friends simply stared in confusion at their jumpy friend. Izuku cleared his throat, trying to hide his blush. Sorry, what? Just making sure you're still here, sleepyhead, Uraraka said, chuckling a little. The group eventually didn't give much thought to Izuku's odd response because they were accustomed to his awkward behavior. Why yeah, just, still thinking about yesterday, I guess. Aida stroked his chin thoughtfully and said, that explains why you were looking so intently at Ishido. Izuku's eyes widened. Had he noticed? After witnessing what happened firsthand, it's only natural that you'd be worried about her. It wasn't untrue, of course, but at least he hadn't thought it was something less honorable. Uraraka interrupted, saying, I wanted to ask, actually. Why were you hanging out with Mina anyway? There was an oddity in her tone. I didn't think you two really knew each other that well. Izuku stopped. He frantically tried to come up with an explanation, saying, well, why you see, I was kind of having trouble finding my way around, and, Ishido just sort of bumped into me and decided to, show me around. In a technical sense, he was being honest. I would not say it's so unusual, Aida continued, adding that Ishido is, after all, a very gregarious person. Also, everyone in our class gets along great. Actually, maybe not including Bakugo. Izuku couldn't help but wonder why she had brought it up, and he thought it was a little odd to see him and Mina together. Fair enough, Uraraka seemed satisfied. But Izuku realized something when he thought about Uraraka. Despite how long he had known her, he had never thought about Uraraka in that way. He had been nervous around her at first because she was one of the first girls, if not his first friend, that he had really talked to, but as they became friends, he found himself not thinking much of it. However, even when he was first getting to know her, he had never thought about her the way he was thinking about Mina now, and aside from the one time he saw Uraraka's costume for the first time, he had never looked at her the way he kept catching himself looking at Mina. To be honest, He hadn't discussed this with any of the other girls in his class. He could not possibly. No, that couldn't be right. What was happening? What did this mean? He shook his head, cleared his place at the table, and went to class, his mind still full of questions, but the ringing of the bell brought him back to the present. As the UA students started heading back to their classes, the hallway was crowded, and Kirishima and Mina were standing by a window, away from the school traffic. So what's going on? After asking to speak, Kirishima had said little more than to tell Mina to follow him out into the hall to where they were now standing. After glancing at his friend from middle school for a moment, the redhead quickly decided on his typical approach to the subject he wanted to cover. Is there a relationship between you and Midoriya now? Naturally, that approach was as straightforward as possible. It took a moment for Mina's mind to process what he had just asked. What? She shouted, causing a few nearby students to glance over. She covered her mouth, waiting for them to look away before continuing. What are you talking about? She had a deep magenta face. You're not exactly being subtle about it, Mina, so get over it. He crossed his arms and said, you've been sneaking looks at the guy all day. Mina looked down, so he had witnessed all of that. Plus, you getting all defensive when I asked why you were with him yesterday was a little weird. He believed Midoriya had something to do with her sudden interest in academics, but he didn't feel the need to bring it up. Why would you care even if there were? Mina was obviously irritated with him prying into her personal affairs. The sharp-toothed boy leaned against the wall and said, I know, this is personal stuff I'm asking about. That's why I didn't want to bring it up in front of the others. Mina, who had known Kirishima long enough to realize that he was asking because he cared about his friend, sighed, but you seemed off today, so I just wanted to make sure everything's okay. He had all the tact of, well, a rock. Yeah, everything's fine, she said quietly. And, well, no, there isn't anything going on with me and Midoriya. She inhaled deeply. But, you want something to happen, don't you? Mina reddened once more. He was aware that it was foolish. Yeah, impetuous. What? No, you've hardly spoken to the guy, so it's just a little surprising, he reassured his pink friend. Well, I'm still working it out in some ways. However, this all began after our finals. Mina decided that discussing this with someone would help her come up with a better plan of action. Kirishima appeared to flinch when the topic of the exams was brought up, but he had also failed. I was not happy with myself, to say the least. She recalled the dark, hopeless state she had been in after the practical. Not just about the exam, just about everything. She shuddered. She never wanted to feel that way again. I felt like I hadn't made any progress this semester, and when I saw how far everyone else had come I was starting to think I should just drop out. Her tone made it clear to him how terrible she must have felt. Shit, I wasn't too proud of myself either, but, wouldn't you know it, someone managed to snap me out of it. I'll guess it's Midoriya. That sounds like him, alright. Mina laughed. Kirishima couldn't help but smile. The little guy had a way of being able to fire up his classmates. He was starting to understand. Yeah, she paused, then said, he told me some pretty intimate things about himself. She didn't think it was appropriate to elaborate on what Izuku had told her, but luckily Kirishima didn't press. After that, I decided I wanted to get to know him a little more. Made me realize I shouldn't be giving up over a couple bad grades. At least, initially, she said, rubbing her arm. However, I am beginning to see that I may want to be more than just his friend. You could. Kirishima's eyebrow went up. Like I said, I'm still sort of figuring stuff out. She exhaled. I'm just not sure what to do. How about simply asking him out? Without hesitation, the redhead asked. Shish. Mina quickly waved her hands down, checking to make sure no one had heard him. Why don't you tell the entire school? With a sheepish smile, he apologized. Sorry, and Mina couldn't help but think that he had done it to play a practical joke on her. I can't just do that, either. We have only been acquainted for about 2 days, and well, you are aware of Midoriya's personality. Izuku's social awkwardness and propensity to overreact in emotional situations were well documented in Class 1A. Besides, I'm still not entirely sure how I'm feeling, Izuku said. I don't think I can be that direct with him without freaking him out. I want to spend a little more time with him first, even though I'm fairly certain that I like him. You know, just to make sure it's real. Yeah, absolutely. Kirishima wasn't exactly sure what she meant, but he was never good at dealing with emotional stuff. Still, he wanted to help his friend. He snapped his fingers as an idea formed in his head. Why not ask him to help you study this week? You mentioned that you wanted to concentrate on schoolwork just prior to the camp, correct? Mina asked, turning her head slightly in confusion. It wasn't a bad idea, Mina thought, blinking a few times. Midoriya's a pretty smart guy, I'm sure he'd be a big help. She could work on improving her grades for the upcoming semester and spend some time alone with Izuku to better understand her feelings for him. Then when the time was right, she could make the move. It was the ideal plan, she smiled. You're an absolute genius, Horn Buddy. I guess you're not as stupid as you look, she said, knocking on his head. Hiroshima gave her a gentle shove and said, hey, like you're one to talk, but he was also grinning. All right. Perhaps I can speak with him after class and OSH*T. Mina glanced at her phone and said, come on, we're going to be late. She suspected that Mr. Aizawa would not give a damn if it was the last day of class. To him, being late was just as bad as being late. Hiroshima chuckled to himself as he watched her take off. You mean Mina and Midoriya? Not even sure whether Midoriya understood what dating meant, he silently wished his friend luck, hoping that things would work out. Hopefully not. With a growl, Hiroshima pushed that unsightly thought from his mind and pushed his head back against the wall a little. He began to walk to class, saying, come on, man, don't be like that. Hiroshima knew that Midoriya was a good man, and despite his typically shy manner, he had a hero's heart, possibly more than anyone else in the class. Whatever he and Mina discussed the other day had clearly changed her perception of the little guy. He would look after her well. Furthermore, Hiroshima was a man, and jealousy was not a manly trait. The final bell rang, and the entire school erupted in cheers, marking the official end of the semester, and the students were ecstatic. In a week, I'll see you all again. The majority of Class 1A was already out of their seats, ready to get going, when Mr. Aizawa concluded, enjoy your summer in the meantime. He started to put away his materials. As he put his notes away, Izuku let out a sigh of relief. His lack of sleep had made the day difficult, and he was eager to get home. The fact that he was finally enjoying a little respite from the wonderful madness that was UA was also boosting his spirits, but what would he do with his time? He thought about his options as he left the classroom. Naturally, there was training. He couldn't afford to take it easy if he wanted to master one for all, but he couldn't spend the entire week doing that either. The thought of trying to train his quirk for a week straight sounded like the worst thing in the world. Now he had friends, too. It was hard to think, but he might be able to hang out with people outside of school, like Uraraka or Aida, or even. Hi, Midoriya, Mina. Her presence naturally startled him a little, but he had been too preoccupied with his plans to notice she had come close. Oh, Mina rolled her eyes as he said, hello, Ashido. How many times must we review this? I meant Mina. Oh, I apologize. What did I say about saying I was sorry? Oh no. He slapped a hand over his mouth to shut himself up. Less than a minute of talking and she already had him acting like a nervous wreck. She really had a natural talent for it. Anyways, how are you feeling? He asked, glancing down at her right hand. This is still a major pain, but it's much better than it was yesterday. It's quite difficult to not be able to use your dominant hand for things, so I'm excited to take it off tonight, she muttered. However, you would be aware of that, wouldn't you? She chuckled and gave him a light-hearted elbow push on the arm. The brief contact, for some reason, caused Izuku's hair to stand on end. He had attended class more times than he would have liked to recall wearing arm casts. Haha, yeah, I guess I would. I guess we now share that in common as well. Izuku Midoriya and Mina Ashido are Class 1A brothers in Brotherhood. They both laughed. Mina's vivacious demeanor had somewhat afflicted Izuku once more. He would always smile at her. Mina went on after their laughter subsided. So actually, I kinda had a favor I wanted to ask, if that's okay. She inquired. Yeah, what is it? Given Mina's playful demeanor, Izuku was a little unsure. Well, we have a week before this camp thing and well, she explained, and with Thesseremedial classes I'll be doing, I kind of wanted to get a head start on catching up with school. I have to keep my mind active, don't you? Izuku was pleased to see that she was still dedicated to raising her grades, but he wasn't sure how this involved him. But the thing is, I barely have any notes to go off, she said, prodding her forehead several times. Additionally, I'm not the smartest girl in the world, so, she smiled broadly and closed her eyes, asking if you would be open to helping me with my studies. Would you please be pretty? He was helping her study. He was tutoring her. Where would they study with school closed? A library, a park, one of their homes. This confused Izuku. The picture of the two of them studying together in his room began to take shape in his mind as his imagination ran wild. A girl, by herself in his room. Izuku's face became so hot that he thought he could smell steam rising from his ears. Midoriya, you're doing it again. Fortunately, Izuku was never coherent enough for his thoughts to be understood, but that didn't alleviate his embarrassment. Just now, he had been vocalizing all of his thoughts, mumbling them under his breath, a rather notorious habit. Mina sighed, observing his response to her query, which she had feared. Look, if you don't want to, I get it. Sorry, he suddenly exclaimed. Despite his nervousness, Izuku wasn't opposed to the idea. He wanted to help however he could, and it would be a good mental workout for him. I'd be okay with it. He also wanted to spend more time with Mina, and even though he could get worked up around her, he was finding that being with her just made him feel good, probably because of all the positive energy she exuded. It couldn't be anything else, could it? He was still getting to know her, so he couldn't be feeling anything like that for her. People you just started talking to don't do that. Correct. But wouldn't you prefer the assistance of someone like Yaoyorozu? He acknowledged that he wasn't sure he could be a good tutor. Don't get me wrong, she was helpful, but I didn't like how ostentatious her place was. Additionally, she appeared more concerned with being a good host than actually assisting us with our studies. Mina was grateful for her classmates' assistance, as the study sessions had helped her pass the written exam, but she wasn't excited about any one-on-one study sessions with the wealthy girl. Furthermore, approaching Izuku was half the purpose of this. Oh, okay, then, when should we get together? How about we begin tomorrow? What, so quickly? Izuku doubted that he would be psychologically ready by that time. You do realize that we only have a week. Time is of the essence. Go beyond, and all that. She punched the air. Izuku couldn't help but chuckle at her enthusiasm. This was something he was going to regret, so he said, all right, tomorrow. That sounds good. Now let's just exchange numbers so we can figure out, she said, taking out her phone. Someone walked between the two friends and bumped into Izuku, so she trailed off. Mina's eyes narrowed, and a voice growled, hey, watch where you're fucking going, loser, before pushing Izuku unfriendly with their shoulder and moving on. Bakugo. Mina had never been a big fan of the class's resident hothead, but after Izuku told her about his past, how he had been teased as a child for being supposedly quirkless, she found herself even less fond of him. Although they obviously knew each other before coming to UA, Mina had never given their relationship much thought until she realized that Bakugo had previously called him names like, quirkless loser, and that he was one of Izuku's former bullies. He wasn't a hero, he was just a jerk with a powerful quirk, and the idea that he was here at UA, spending his time making fun of someone like Izuku, annoyed her. How about keeping an eye on your destination? Bakugo came to a complete halt, and Mina caught a glimpse of Izuku freeze as well, turning his head so that one eye was fixed on her. You just said what? He glared and growled, sounding both shocked and indignant, as though he was unable to process the notion of being called out. Izuku intervened to prevent this from getting worse, saying, Mina, it's okay, let's just go, okay. Mina remained silent, but given Bakugo an equally intense glare in return. They looked at each other for a few seconds before the blonde turned back and continued to walk, but not before giving Mina the finger. Why do you deny him that? She inquired. It's a long story, Kachan and I, well, he wasn't always like that. That was very difficult for Mina to believe. Just, please don't worry, I'm no longer particularly bothered by it. Anyway, that's the part Mina didn't like, but she would drop it if he insisted. She sighed. Her positive attitude had been ruined by that jerk. So, you mentioned phone numbers, right? Oh, right. Mina opened her phone, deciding to put Bakugo out of her mind for the time being, and the two exchanged numbers. Naturally, Izuku became a little alarmed upon realizing that he had just been given a girl's phone number. Well, I'll check in tomorrow. We can discuss a time and location later. Goodbye. Izuku was left staring at his phone in awe as Mina left. She had thought about asking to accompany him on his walk to the train station, but she decided to give him some space because she had to be patient with him. After a minute of staring at the number on his phone, Izuku finally acknowledged that Mina Ishido had indeed provided him with her number. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. His eyes widened as he returned to his phone's main menu and saw the time. Oh no, my train will arrive shortly. In order to avoid having to wait for the next ride home, he started running. Izuku was beginning to believe that he had erred. The boy sat at his room's desk and went through the notes he had taken on a variety of subjects this semester to make sure he understood the material. Izuku's notebooks were filled with information because taking notes had been his hobby for the majority of his life. In case it was significant, he had a habit of writing down almost everything the teachers mentioned. He gave a yawn. The exhausted teenager was actually still in his pajamas at around 11 o'clock in the evening. He'd been exhausted all day, but he hadn't been able to sleep. Similar to last night, a flurry of ideas raced through his mind, keeping him from falling asleep entirely. They were mostly about Mina, of course. He was looking through his books and notes because he had agreed to help his pink friend study tomorrow, which was the main cause of his insomnia. His confidence dwindled as he considered the entire scenario. Mina, tutor. It was hard enough for him to have normal conversations with her. But in order for her to understand, he would now have to learn how to explain things clearly. After all, he couldn't simply give her his notes and hope she would learn everything. Would he be able to respond to her inquiries? Could he provide clear explanations for some of the more complex concepts? These kinds of questions were causing him to question himself. Izuku simply didn't know how trustworthy he was, and Mina was going to be depending on him to help her. He let out a sigh. Perhaps he ought to cancel this. With his thumb hovering over the call button, he pulled up Mina's number on his phone. Most likely, she was still conscious. Izuku prepared his response by saying, "Mina, I'm really sorry, but I'm having second thoughts about this," out loud. He pushed the call button, trying to brace himself for her reaction. The telephone began to ring. The voice on the other end said, "Midoriya. Didn't think you'd still be awake. What's up?" Oh, you well, I just wanted to talk about tomorrow." He inhaled sharply as he tried to summon the bravery to cancel their plans. Her disappointment was already audible to him. Izuku was suddenly reminded of their chance meeting from the other day. He remembered clearly how much Mina's cold, depraved manner had disturbed him. All that disillusionment and insecurity. Hello, he paused. Would she assume he didn't believe in her if he told her he had changed his mind? That he felt it was a waste of his time to try to help her get better? That he was lying to her that day about everything? No, Izuku believed in Mina. That's why he told her what he did that day. He told her things he hadn't told anyone else because he wanted to demonstrate his belief in her and the need for her to have self-confidence. She had clearly taken his advice to heart because she was making an effort to raise her grades. Mina had approached him for assistance. Because she believed he could teach her, she had done so. And if that were true, he had to think she had good reason to trust him. "You fall asleep on me, man." He lied and said, "Sorry, I got distracted." "No kidding. So what about tomorrow?" Izuku had to come up with a statement. He was genuinely interested. "I was just wondering, what subjects you wanted to focus on?" he asked. Izuku was thankful that Mina didn't seem to suspect anything. Haven't really thought about it." The statement, "To be honest, I'm kinda sorta struggling with everything," was obviously not one she was proud of. The boy in the pajamas yawned once more. "Oh, well then, we can figure it out when we meet." She laughed and said, "Sounds good. Anyways, you sound exhausted. Get some sleep, will you? I can't have my teacher napping on the job tomorrow." Izuku was relieved that she wasn't present to witness his blush. "Why yeah, got it. Well, talk to you tomorrow." "Yep, night, buddy." Before he realized he had unintentionally used her first name, he hung up, saying, "Night, Mina." Even though no one was around, he automatically covered his mouth with his hand. Izuku simply wasn't used to being so casual with someone, except perhaps Kachan, even though she had insisted he call her that. He was surprised because he was not used to using first names without giving it much thought. He would ponder why he had done it, but his lack of sleep was quickly catching up to him now that he had put his self-doubts about tutoring aside. With another yawn, he rose from his chair and walked to his bed, where he nearly collapsed. The last thought that crossed his mind before he fell asleep was of Mina's happy face. Mina was startled out of her sleep by a sudden unease. She opened her eyes slowly and then closed them again when a flash of light blinded her. "Stupid sun," she complained as she rolled over. A ray of sunlight was shining directly on her face through a gap in the blinds on her window. Her voice was obviously groggy as she asked, "Why do you have to be so bright?" She tried to fall back asleep, but was unsuccessful, so she thought she might as well get out of bed. Mina yawned and sat up, extending her arms. She glanced at her clock on the side of her bed. 10 a.m. She had, in fact, slept in later. It was obvious that Mina was not a morning person. She was still pretty sleepy, but she wasn't as completely broken as she usually was at school because she slept in. Only her left leg was truly beneath the covers, which were halfway off the bed. It happened quite frequently. Mina had a tendency to warm up at night. She was also only wearing her underwear for the same reasons. Quite typical for her, once more. She swung her legs off the bed's side with some effort, and her feet found the fuzzy pink slippers she kept there. She got to her feet slowly. A slight sluggishness took the place of her usual vigor. She pulled her exhausted self to her closet, where she grabbed some flannel pants and a purple bathrobe to wrap around herself. As soon as she was clean, she left her bedroom and went downstairs. No one else seemed to be home. She should be grateful that her family allowed her to sleep in, Mina thought. She went into the kitchen and proceeded to prepare her own breakfast and a large cup of coffee. She saw a sticky note on the coffee maker as she was moving around. "I took Makoto to a doctor's appointment, Mina. After that, you'll have the place to yourself for a few hours as we'll be running errands. If you are going to leave the house, give me a call. Mom, love." And in much cruder writing, just beneath this. "And you're going to get into a lot of trouble if you touch my games. Makoto." Mina gave an eye roll. In fact, he was using every chance to make her feel bad about the fact that he now owned all of her games. Generally speaking, Mina's parents were quite relaxed. Given her personality, most people probably wouldn't be shocked to hear this. However, they were limited. One of them was Mina's exam failure, for which she was made to give all of her video games to her younger brother Makoto until she improved her grades. He was making the most of the situation by taunting and annoying her about it in all the ways a little brother could because she hardly ever allowed him to touch her belongings. Even though she was already driven to perform better in school, it was undoubtedly helpful to regain her games and silence him. In any case, Mina was left alone since her dad was out of town for work and her mother and brother were away on appointments and errands. To get even with Makoto, she considered entering his room and ruining all of his saves. Naturally, though, that would land her in serious trouble. Perhaps all the discs were placed in the incorrect cases. She would simply pretend it was his lack of organization if he complained. Their mother would most likely accept it. Her phone buzzed as she sipped her coffee, thinking of ways to get even with her brother, the little devil. Her face lit up when she pulled it out and recognized the person. Izuku texted, "Hello Mina, are you awake?" Mina was half awake and had momentarily forgotten her plans with the boy. She began typing in response. "Barely lol." At his anxious reply, she laughed and said, "Oh, sorry. Did I wake you?" Izuku was just so Izuku, even in text form. "No, you're fine. I just woke up about 10 minutes ago." She had a feeling he had been up much longer because he appeared to be an early riser. "Anyways, what's up?" Mina couldn't help but chuckle at the disparity between Izuku's and her messages. "Well, I just wanted to try to figure out a time and place for us to meet today. I'm helping my mom around the house for a few hours but I should be available around 1. She could picture him sitting there, carefully typing out his texts to make them appear proper. Not at all like her, use as few keys as possible, approach. What a dork he was. A cute dork, though. If you will, adorable. Mina tried to come up with a suitable meeting spot, ignoring her laughter at the formality of his texts. "Well, we could do my place. I am home alone at the moment. Though it could get awkward if my family comes home to find me alone with a guy from school." Actually, Mina had no desire to learn here. She was unsure of when her family would return, and once they did, she would be unable to concentrate. However, she was aware that bringing up the possibility of them being by themselves in her home would frighten him. She thought of him again, his hands shaking as he read her message, his face flushed out of control. "Odnfg. I didn't Maya, I didn't mean to send that." "That," Mina grinned, her vision validated by the series of inconsistent answers. She chose to spare him more suffering by asking about his location and saying, "I'm just kidding, dude. Chill." It took him a little while to respond next. A library seemed ideal, so I said, "There's a library a few blocks away from my apartment. We could meet there if you want." "Sounds good to me. How about 1:30? "That would be fine. I'll send you the address. I'll see you then, Mina." CYA Midoriya. The hot pink teen put her phone down and went back to eating breakfast. She saw that, without her having to remind him, he had called her Mina. Advancement. 1:30. Now that it was 10:30, she wanted to allow herself an hour or so to get to the library for safety's sake. She had roughly 2 hours to kill. More significantly, she needed 2 hours to mentally get ready. Mina wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to get closer to her new crush, even though she had every intention of concentrating on finishing some real studying. She became more certain of her feelings for Izuku the more she thought about him. Naturally, that only increased her level of anxiety about the situation. Did he think the same of her? She had no way of knowing. Yes, he was easily agitated around her, but that could be explained by his innate awkwardness around women. Uraraka claimed that although he had initially behaved quite similarly toward her, they now appeared to be just close friends. Obviously, she was unable to directly question him about his feelings. "Do you like me?" is a question that would probably cause the poor boy to pass out right away. A similar outcome would probably occur if she disclosed her own emotions. At the same time, Mina didn't think he would ever mention it, even if he did feel something for her. One way or another, she had to initiate contact. She had to be discreet. Occasionally, make a gesture or remark that suggested she was attracted to him. Regretfully, Mina was never good at being subtle. What if he simply failed to understand? She didn't want their relationship to become awkward. Because of everything, her greatest fear was losing him as a friend. However, she was the type of person who couldn't simply ignore her emotions. "I couldn't just try to ignore this crush." The girl in the robes rubbed her temples and sighed. All of this was too soon to consider. She thought about what she would do for the next few hours as she finished her breakfast. Eventually, in an attempt to at least temporarily clear her head, she made the decision to go for a run. There was no doubt that today would be interesting. Izuku stood outside the library, scanning the area anxiously. Mina would arrive at any moment, and it was just past 1:30. The weather was warm, so he was dressed in a blue t-shirt and tan shorts. He had a backpack full of study aids. He couldn't help but think that the weight on his back now would have been intolerable to him only a year ago. However, it didn't feel at all heavy after he trained with all might. It made him feel proud, which is uncommon for the inheritor of One for All. Regretfully, that did little to ease his anxiety. The idea of tutoring someone still made him very nervous. But he was going to follow through on what he had promised Mina. Izuku noticed a pink figure in the distance and felt his chest tighten a little. He whispered, "Oh God, she's here." Despite his best efforts to prepare for it, he was actually spending his afternoon by himself with a girl. It had at least been a class trip, so hanging out with Mina at the mall was one thing. But they were alone, just the two of them. That, for whatever reason, gave it a more intimate feel for Izuku, closer. That, of course, was greatly reducing his anxiety. "Calm down," he told himself, inhaling deeply. "You're just here to study, that's all. There's nothing else going on here. Just a couple friends studying together. Guys and girls hang out like this all the time, it's nothing weird." Mina's voice interrupted, "You really like talking to yourself, don't you?" Apparently, Izuku had been absorbed in his thoughts long enough for Mina to get to him. Izuku flinched at the unexpected voice and turned away from his friend in an attempt to cover up his embarrassment. He looked at her, then quickly averted his gaze again, saying, It's an old habit." Mina was dressed now in white shorts that hung down to her knees and a lime green tank top. Her midriff was visible due to the tight fit of the garment and the space between her shirt and shorts. In other words, a lot of skin was exposed. Izuku's expression was getting hotter. His body temperature increased further as Mina's playful tone asked, "What's the matter?" "Like what you see." What was going on? This was becoming absurd. He had to get over this. Simply turn around without giving it any thought. He gathered his courage and turned back to her, trying his hardest to maintain eye contact. He asked, attempting to completely divert the conversation from the topic of her attire, Did you find this place all right?" "Yeah, sorry I'm a little late." Train station was crowded. Izuku was still blushing a little, and Mina could see that he was doing his best to maintain eye contact. Getting this kind of response from him was a pleasant bonus, even though the hot weather was the main reason she had chosen this outfit. She made the decision not to play with him just yet. Anyway, shall we get started, teach? Teach. She laughed at her alliterations and said, you know, teacher. Or should I call you, Mr. Midoriya? Dr. Deku maybe, or, what about? Jay, please just call me Izuku. Izuku blurted out abruptly. For a moment, neither spoke. Mina tilted her head. Really? Mina had no problem with people using her first name, but she was much less informal than the boy in front of her, so she was surprised to say that no one, as far as she knew, called Izuku by his first name. Uraraka and Bakugo called him Deku, yes, but that was all. Alright, why you don't mind if I use your first name? Furthermore, you've called me that a few times now. Izuku wasn't really sure why he was saying this. He tried to be formal even with close friends, but when Mina called him Izuku a few times, whether intentionally or not, he felt something. Of course, he felt awkwardly embarrassed to be called so casually, but there was something else that made him happy. He wanted more of that feeling, whatever it was. All right, here's Izuku. She smiled as she spoke. It was there. Izuku had no idea why Mina calling him by his first name made him feel that way, but he couldn't help but smile at the sensation of that warm, tingly feeling in his chest, which was different from the tightness he usually felt when he got nervous. There was one reason, of course, but Izuku would not consider it. Once more, they were nothing more than a couple of friends who happened to be at the library. All right, Mina inquired. You're right, Izuku said. Let's go find a spot, and the two went into the library. As Izuku started unpacking his backpack, Mina took a seat. The two had quickly taken advantage of a small, empty reading room that had a small table and a few chairs in the center, which made it the perfect place. After arranging everything, Izuku sat down beside Mina and said, okay, what do you want to start with? Now that he could concentrate on something other than the girl beside him, he found it a little easier to remain composed. Mina leaned back and put a finger to her chin. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I'm lagging behind in almost every subject, but perhaps math. She wanted to get off to a strong start because it was possibly the hardest subject for her. All right, that's possible. Did you have any specific ideas in mind? Matrix, vectors, perhaps conic sections? Mina gave him a blank look and said, you do remember what that whole thing is, don't you? Which of those was the triangle-shaped thing? Mina looked through her math notes and said, somewhere in here, I have a couple notes on that stuff. That's trigonometry, Mina. Izuku snapped her fingers, trying to conceal his frustration. Izuku noticed that she only had notes for about 20 pages, so she said, right. She reached the end of her notes and said, weird, I swear I wrote some of that down. Can I see your notes? Izuku grudgingly gave her his math notebook, observing as she began to read it. He saw her expression shift to one of bewilderment as she turned several pages, and after a few more, she nearly looked scared. Perhaps I'm simply forgetting exactly what that was. Hey, it looks like you have a lot written down here. She spoke in a slightly weaker tone than normal. It appeared that neither of them had completely realized how much work this would require of them both. With a heavy sigh and a somewhat dejected expression, Mina remarked, well, there's a reason I am at the bottom of the class. Don't think I retained a bunch from those cram sessions for the finals either. This was going to be difficult, but he wasn't going to let that stop him. Don't worry about it, Izuku attempted to reassure her. We just need to spend some extra time on stuff, that's all. Not letting this affect her either, Mina forced a smile and said, yeah, I know. Besides, this just means there's nowhere to go but up, right? She laughed and joked. Izuku couldn't help but admire Mina's perspective, which reminded him of All Might in many ways. Right, that was definitely one way of looking at it. Mina always tried to find the positives, even in what most people would consider to be a bleak situation. It was just one of the many things about her that he found so alluring. So, how about we begin with trigonometry? They had a lot of work to do, so the green-haired boy suggested, attempting to ignore that last thought. It seems like a good place to be. Izuku, let's get going. Her classmate opened his notebook, ignoring the familiar sensation in his chest. The two students had already struck a wall in less than an hour. Really, how can that be incorrect? Izuku winced at the sudden outburst as she slammed her hand on the table and shouted. At first, everything appeared to be going well. Mina seemed to find it easier to follow his lesson in a one-on-one setting than in a classroom full of students. His plan had been to go over each section with her and then give her a few practice problems to try. However, she soon began to lose concentration. Hearing Izuku babble on about triangles simply caused her eyes to glaze over. Regardless of her desire to pay attention, it was almost as if her brain had evolved an automatic defense mechanism to avoid tedious coursework. Mina wanted to learn, and she really did, but she was unable to move past the fact that she had just spent 5 minutes listening to someone discuss how to calculate the length of a triangle's side. What did any of that have to do with being a hero? It only got worse from there. Mina detested math not only because it was dull but also because it was difficult. She had attempted to solve 4 different problems so far and had failed to get any of them right, and she was becoming, to put it mildly, frustrated. It's all right, we can revisit that one. Try the next one. Mina glanced at him and said, stop. With a loud sigh, she placed an elbow on the table and held her cheek in her hand. This, obviously isn't working. Mina was aware that this would not be simple, but it was disheartening to see her making such mistakes at such a young age. Sorry, I probably explained this stuff poorly. Do you want to go over it again? Mina raised her eyebrows. She sat up and threw her arms up, saying, that's not the problem. You're doing great, really. I can't bring myself to give a damn about this. Like, why should it matter whether or not I can calculate a hypotenuse? That has nothing to do with hero work. Like, I get knowing hero law and even history stuff. But when am I going to use math to fight a villain? Izuku detested Mina's distress. Although she was obviously making an effort, she had developed the bad habit of, for want of a better term, slacking off in class. It was going to be difficult to break. He needed to come up with something to say. After all, motivating students was half of a teacher's job. He whispered, if that's the problem, maybe try thinking about it differently. Mina gave him a slightly perplexed look in return. He hesitated for a few seconds, trying to put his thoughts together. Don't focus so much on the subject material itself, I guess. Mina cocked her head and asked, what? Izuku gave his chin a gentle pat. Think about it like this. You don't lift weights because you expect to have to pick up 10-pound dumbbells somewhere, right? You do it to get stronger. Mina gave a nod. He picked up the piece of paper she had been working on and said, well, consider this mathematical problem as a weight for your brain. We aren't taught this because they want us to be well versed in triangles. Well, unless you're going to be a construction hero or something, in which case you need to be aware of that kind of information in order to properly. Izuku, slow down. Mina, who had swiveled her chair to face him, put a hand on his shoulder and said, I think you're getting off topic. Izuku blushed a little, first from her touch and then from his digression. All right, so I believe that we are learning this material in order to train our brain. He went on, think of a fight with a villain like a math problem. Mina arched an eyebrow. A hero needs to be able to think quickly and clearly in a high-pressure situation, and you need a strong brain to do that, he said. Let me explain. The villain is the problem, and the solution you're trying to find is how to defeat them. And there are things you potentially know, just like how this problem gives you one of the triangle's sides and angles. The environment you're fighting in, your quirk, the villain's quirk, you need to be able to think of how to use that information to solve the problem. It wasn't the greatest analogy, but it was what he had in mind. Mina gazed at him for a few moments, wondering if that makes sense. She put a hand to her mouth and tried, failing, to hold back her laughter as she asked, villain fights are math problems, really? The dork in question said, God, you are such a dork, Izuku. And his face flushed. For at least 15 seconds, the laughter persisted. He had to acknowledge that it did sound rather foolish when you gave it some serious thought. Oh man. Mina wiped a tear from her eye and gradually relaxed. She cleared her throat. I really needed that, thanks. Mina had never approached her schoolwork in that way, but she said, but, I get what you're saying. I think, school is a gym for your brain, basically. Yeah, makes sense. Her practical final came back to her. She had gone into a complete panic when Nezu launched his attack. She and Kaminari chose to run and hide until the end of time instead of attempting to assess the situation or devise a plan. Izuku's comparison suggested that her brain might have been out of shape as a result. She attempted to imagine someone similar to Yaoyorozu or Todoroki in that circumstance. Like they did with Mr. Aizawa, they would have undoubtedly maintained their composure, come up with a strategy to get around the challenges in their path, and defeated their opponent. Izuku was ultimately attempting to convey that, in a sense, she would become a better hero after learning about triangles. With a determined smile on her face, she pounded a fist into her palm and said, "All right." Happy that his analogy finally worked, Izuku grinned and said, "Let's take this from the top. I'm gonna whoop these trig problems, butts." Confident that they could advance this time, he turned back to the beginning of the chapter they were in. Mina exclaimed, "Boom, take that, villain," and jumped to her feet, pointing triumphantly at the paper before her. Izuku couldn't help but chuckle at his friend's antics, saying, "Woohoo. Another chapter down. I'm on a roll, baby." He never thought he'd see someone get this excited about studying. After Izuku's mental workout spiel, the tutoring had become much more productive. Compared to when they first started, Mina was much more focused and even began taking some of her own notes. Although there weren't many distractions, he still needed to get her attention frequently because, after all, Mina was still Mina. It was much easier to solve the problems after she was able to focus. She continued to make mistakes occasionally, but after closely examining her work, she finally discovered the solution. Mina's attitude steadily improved as the study session continued. She was able to solve the practice problems more reliably the more they worked together. She also became more energized the more correct answers she received. Mina began treating them all like dangerous villains she had brought to justice, and soon every correct response was reason for celebration. She was clearly running with his ridiculous analogy. Izuku couldn't help but feel proud of Mina for her hard work and of himself for being a successful teacher. He was aware of how difficult it was to begin climbing from the bottom. After all, it was that feeling that initially drew them together. Mina began shadowboxing, asking, "All right, what's next? Come on, bring on the next chapter, coach." She was very enthusiastic, but Izuku was getting a little worn out. At this point, they had truly covered a significant portion of the math course. He proposed, "How about we, take a break?" Mina looked at him in surprise and stopped punching the air. "Huh, really?" Mina stood there for a few seconds before abruptly collapsing in her seat and letting out a loud sigh. "Yeah, I think we could both use one." "Good, my brain's starting to hurt. And I think I got a hand cramp from all this writing." She was grumbling. All of her energy was gone in a moment. Izuku gave a little sigh. It was quite a show how Mina could suddenly change her moods completely. "What time is it, anyway?" The once quirkless boy checked his phone and said, "Oh, it's He hadn't been paying much attention to the time either. 5:30, he exclaimed, startled. They had spent the last 4 hours or so doing this. Mina was stretching the fingers on her right hand by repeatedly curling and uncurling them. "Wow, time flies when you're having fun, huh?" she said. She shook her head and laughed. "Things I thought I would never say about school." Izuku remarked, you were really getting into it," while nuzzling his own head. The horned girl grinned and said, "But, I'm glad you were able to enjoy yourself." Instead of listening to a teacher ramble on, Izuku had a way of explaining the material that made Mina feel a little more involved. "Well, I have you to thank for that. You're not half bad at this whole teaching thing." In a low voice, she winked and added, "You know just what to say to get me going." Izuku stopped. Mina," he stammered, wondering if he had heard correctly. Unconsciously, his gaze began to stray downward. Luckily, he managed to stop them before they reached Mina's neck. The girl with the tank top laughed. "I'm kidding, sheesh, you should see your face," she said, laughing at his humiliation and shaking her head. However, Izuku was only partially paying attention. Hearing Mina talk like that, joke or not, had reminded him of Mina, which he had been able to keep out of his mind ever since they began studying. As usual, he attempted to push them out, but this time it was unsuccessful. He had asked himself why he would think about her so much on multiple occasions. Why, whenever they were together, he would behave more awkwardly than usual. Why, despite her constant teasing, he felt so happy just being around her. Why did he find himself staring at her so intently? Why every time she smiled at him or simply called him Izuku, he would get those amusing sensations in his chest? All those questions could be answered by one possibility, which he had refused to accept. However, it had become more obvious the more he had attempted to ignore it. He had never felt this way about anyone else, so he wasn't entirely sure yet, but he was unable to ignore it any longer. There was at least a possibility. He had to concede that one possibility. By this time, Mina had stopped laughing and was beginning to feel bad about what she had said. Her remark seemed to shut Izuku down. He wasn't even really looking at anything anymore. Suddenly there was a great deal of tension in the air. Even if she wasn't being totally serious, she might have gone a little too far. She acknowledged, "Sorry, that was a bit much. Even for me." Izuku didn't acknowledge her if he heard her. The pink girl let out a sigh. It would be awkward to try to do anything else, so she started putting her things away. "Look, maybe we should call it quits for today. We've been at this all afternoon. Besides, I'm getting pretty hungry." This was what she had feared would happen. She found the idea of subtlety somewhat alien, particularly when it came to communicating her emotions. Izuku felt a knot in his stomach. His mouth was stuck shut when he tried to speak. As he struggled to accept one basic, horrifying fact, his mind was a whirlpool of feelings. Mina was liked by him. Liked Mina, that is. He believes he did, anyway. All these emotions could only be explained by it. Mina had finished packing and was getting ready to leave when she said, "Anyway, I'll see you later." Izuku, wait, stood up. Mina spun around, a little taken aback by his unexpected comeback to life. His knees trembled. He had a dry throat. At least his heart rate had likely doubled. He didn't know why he yelled that. He was panicking inside. How did he do it? Now what ought he to say? He just realized that Mina, the girl he was likely attracted to, was staring at him expectantly. Yes, he had something to say. Anything. The words, "How about we get dinner together?" escaped his lips before his brain could process them. As Izuku realized what he had just said, time seemed to stop. He let out a mental scream. What had he done? Of all things, why did he say that? He wanted to retract what he had said, to claim that he had misspoken, but the words stuck in his throat. Mina processed his question just as slowly. She mentally reenacted it once, twice, and 3 times. Her gaze expanded. Did he simply do what she believed him to have done? "Are you asking me out?" she asked, covering her mouth as soon as she realized she hadn't intended to say it aloud. Izuku felt a lurch of nausea. His whole body was burning. It was this. In fact, he would die of embarrassment. BWUH, his mind had trouble forming words. He squeezed his eyes shut, expecting to be slapped in the face for asking such a crazy question, but as much as he wanted to deny it, the answer was, "Why yes." Rather, a cautious hand touched his shoulder. Mina was standing a little closer now, grinning warmly at him when he opened one eye. Her face also showed obvious embarrassment. Silently, she uttered, "Well, I'd love to." He had initiated contact. She was still in awe of what was happening. It had all happened so quickly. The lobster in front of her stumbled. Really? Did he have a dream? Had he really fainted? "Yes, really," she said, lowering her gaze. Izuku's eyes widened. I was probably gonna ask you out eventually." Mina continued to smile but rolled her eyes, saying, What? But why?" As if it were the most obvious thing in the world, she said, "Because I like you, silly." Her chest was thumping with her heartbeat. In fact, she had confessed. Izuku was positive that he was dreaming. Did you feel the same way about Mina, the girl he recently discovered he had feelings for? Did a girl like him? Before he realized this was real, he pinched himself several times. Now are we just gonna stand here gawking at each other, or get some food? Come on, I'm starving here. Just a second. Izuku began packing up his things frantically, but he finally managed to gather himself. A date. In fact, he had a date planned. A date. Izuku had a date planned. In reality, Izuku was going out on a date. The brain of One for All's inheritor had been trying to process this information for the past few minutes, but it had been stuck on repeat. No girl could be interested in someone like him, it just didn't seem possible. Nevertheless, he was with a girl he genuinely had feelings for, not just any girl. Not only had she consented to go out with him instead of scoffing at his request, but she genuinely felt the same way about him. It went against everything Izuku had been taught to believe. However, that had occurred frequently this year. He looked at the girl who was walking beside him. Izuku had suggested a ramen shop that was reasonably close to the library because it was close to his house, and Mina seemed to be okay with that. The two had walked in near silence after making that decision. Mina was nervous, but she was obviously not nearly as agitated as Izuku. She was still a little taken aback by the unexpected question from the typically bashful boy. She still found it hard to believe that he had asked her out rather than the other way around. Furthermore, even though she wasn't yet sure it was a good idea, she had made the decision to immediately confess her feelings. Izuku hadn't really responded to it with anything. Did he not feel the same, really? If he didn't, though, why would he ask her out? Was he simply uncomfortable expressing it? The girl with the yellow and black eyes shook her head. She had never been this shaken before. Her voice simply refused to cooperate when she tried to speak to the boy. The best she could do was glance at him every now and then. He was doing the same thing, but she didn't know it. Coincidentally, they both attempted to sneak a peek at the same moment. They both snapped their heads away from each other when they realized the other had caught them. Mina was growing irritated. What was she doing? She was not at all like this shy girl routine. She cleared her throat. She gathered her courage and turned back to face her date. So, she said. Izuku appeared a little taken aback by this, indicating that he had been thinking deeply as usual. How much further is this place? It's right around this sea corner. Actually, the tense boy stammered under his breath. Mina let out a sigh. If this was going to work, they both needed to relax a bit. The sign for the store Izuku had mentioned appeared as they turned the corner of the street. Izuku bounded forward as the two teenagers got close to the entrance. He had thrown the door open too enthusiastically and held it open as he stepped to the side before Mina could react. He practically bowed as he squeaked, after you," and motioned for her to come in with his free hand. Guys were supposed to do things like this when they were out on dates, right? Before realizing what he was doing, the horned girl gazed at him indifferently for a few seconds. Izuku's exaggerated chivalry seemed to smother the stuffy, awkward air in an instant. Mina shouted in a fancy voice, "Oh my, such a gentleman," while curtsying with an invisible dress. He was really adorable, still a sweetie, albeit a dorky one. Mina went into the restaurant with her companion right behind her, giggling at the flush that came over his face at her remark. They took seats across from each other in a booth. "This is nice," Mina said, surveying the area. "Very romantic." She was back to her normal, teasing self after regaining her composure. As she said this, Izuku looked down at his menu and made a tiny, high-pitched sound. Mina's giggles reached his ears again. "Come on, Izuku, we're on a date here. Lighten up a bit." He swallowed. She was correct, of course, but at the moment, he found it nearly impossible to relax. He muttered, sorry," with obvious embarrassment at his own misery. He inhaled deeply, attempting to relax a little. It began to work slowly. His heart rate slowed, his stomach muscles relaxed, and his hands stopped trembling slightly. He summoned the strength to turn to Mina. He smiled, and so did she. Mina glanced at her menu and said, "That's better. Now, what to get?" The two deliberated for a while, with Izuku suggesting a few items to Mina at her request. A waiter stopped by to take their orders and then came back with drinks not long after. The two talked a little while they waited for food, feeling a little more relaxed now. Mina inquired, "So do you come here often?" "Well, my mom would take me here a lot when I was younger. Nowadays it's kind of a special occasion thing for us." Mina laughed. "Figures you're a mama's boy." That's..." Izuku sipped his drink, blushing and appearing to shrink a little to keep from speaking. Mina chuckled. She paused and said, "Nothing wrong with that. I think it's cute." She winked as she added, "Just like you." Izuku choked a little on his drink and began to cough. If she continued to say such things, how could she expect him to relax? He secretly enjoyed hearing her say such things, of course. It was encouraging, to put it mildly, to know that someone thought this of him. Mina said, "Whoa, don't die on me, man." Izuku repeatedly hammered his chest. He sputtered, sorry, as his coughing stopped. They exchanged glances for a while. He hadn't said anything romantic since they'd left the library, Izuku realized. Even though he didn't really mean to at the time, he had been the one to propose that they go out in the first place. Mina was obviously trying to make something of this, as evidenced by her occasional flirtatious remarks. He gulped down some saliva. At least he ought to say something kind. Perhaps compliment her on how she looks. "You did that on dates, don't you?" He ought to remark on her attire, hairstyle, or, "You're pretty." Izuku's face turned dark red and he buried it in his hands. It seems that today his mouth and brain were not cooperating. His remark caused Mina's cheeks to flush, but she also started laughing. Smooth. How long did it take you to come up with that one? Izuku's hands muffled his voice as he said, I'm really bad at this. He tried, but why? Kinda. Izuku's anxiety increased as he felt her hands snatch his. He was staring at her when she slowly drew them away. Look, you don't need to try so hard. I mean, I appreciate the compliment, but it almost sounded forced. Izuku turned his head away. Well, we're on a date, so I figured. She gave his hands a slight squeeze and said, just act natural, dude. Izuku nodded but remained silent when he said, don't do stuff because you think you have to. Good. After a minute or so, their food arrived, and they immediately began to eat. Mina remarked, this is pretty good, while chomping on some noodles. Izuku just nodded back, unwilling to speak while his mouth was full. I can see why you like this place so much. As they ate, they remained silent. Every now and then one of them would remark on some feature of the food, but that was all. Izuku thought about what Mina had said. He should not be attempting to do or say anything just because it was supposed to do on a date, and she was right. At least not unless he really wanted to, and made it abundantly evident that he was not a romantic. He glanced up at the girl on the other side of him from his bowl. Naturally, his sarcastic remark wasn't a lie. Izuku did think Mina was pretty. He felt a little less spooky now that he knew he apparently had feelings for her, and that she had feelings for him. He was still a little uneasy about her outfit, of course, and was trying even harder not to gawk at something he shouldn't. He suspected she had picked that outfit on purpose to play a practical joke on him, since he knew she had been planning to ask him out at some point in the future. She intended to propose to him. He kept hearing her say, because I like you, silly. Through his mind, it was difficult enough for him to believe that she was open to going on a date, but it was even more unbelievable to learn that she was already feeling something for him. What it was she saw in him was a mystery to him. He didn't think he was any different. That inconspicuous, quiet, strange nerdy kid. Hey, Mina, had been bothering him the entire time, even though he wasn't sure if it was a good idea. At the moment, Mina was slurping the last of the broth from her bowl in front of her face. She appeared to be a very quick eater. She wiped her mouth and lowered the bowl, asking, The girl looked at him and tilted her head slightly, saying, can I ask you something? You just did, she jokingly said, grinning. The corner of Izuku's mouth twitched slightly. It was a silly joke, but funny nonetheless. But seriously, of course. Shoot. Well, thumbs twitched the anxious boy. He turned his head slightly away as his cheeks warmed up. I've been wanting to ask, what, he said. Mina remained silent for a few seconds before asking, what is it you, like about me? Izuku said, well, for starters, that adorable face of yours, and her entire face lit up. She laughed. Seriously, you're just so cute when you get all worked up like that. He was cute, in her opinion. Even though Izuku was already aware of this, it didn't make him any less flushed. But besides that, it's your unbreakable spirit. You're, seriously the most determined, passionate dude I've ever met. You're always ready to face every challenge, no matter what life throws at you. I really admire that about you. She stopped. I want to be more like that. Hard-working, driven. Mina, it might take some work to get him to open up, but she never got the sense he was trying to hide anything. But also, it's your genuineness. Is that a word? You're just so honest and open about yourself and your feelings when you want to be. You're not afraid to be emotional. I think it's really sweet. Izuku just rubbed the back of his head and replied, oh. He felt butterflies in his stomach. He said softly, I feel kind of similar about you, actually. Mina noticed a slight tightening of her chest muscles. Why you're so comfortable with yourself. Why you're always so confident and positive about everything, he mumbled. It's a lot like All Might. I want to be more like both him and you. He choked up. He blushed again and said, I really like that about you, Mina. The now blushing girl jokingly asked, and you think I'm really pretty, right? Izuku stammered out, and sighed. Why yes. They were silent for a moment, and then they both burst out laughing. Perhaps it was just the positive mood they were in, but neither of them knew why they were laughing. Izuku was enjoying himself despite his frequent stuttering and general uneasiness. He was completely happy when he was eating with someone he cared about. Mina, of course, was feeling the same way. Instead of laughing, they just smiled warmly at one another while staring into each other's eyes. They appeared to have been drawn to one another because they both wanted to be more like the other and admired something about them. It didn't hurt that they found each other attractive physically either. They kept looking at each other. The rest of the world appeared to vanish for a moment. Mina, Izuku. The moment was cut short when their server appeared out of nowhere and set a check on the table. The two pupils were understandably a little miffed at this interruption. Izuku rushed to get the check. "Let me get that for you, okay." He reached for the paper, but Mina grabbed his arm and said, "Izuku, no. But I should have asked you out." She pushed his hand away and asked, "What did I say earlier?" "I appreciate the gesture, but we can split it." "I don't mind." They each took out their wallets and said, Oh, alright, are you certain you?" "Yes, Izuku." The heroes in training turned to one another as they left the restaurant, pausing just outside. Mina began, "So, now what?" They had been out for approximately an hour, and it was only 6:45. "Well, should we end the evening?" Izuku didn't want to impose, but he also didn't really want to part ways just yet. "Are you serious? Dude, it's much too early. In addition," she said, "I still want to spend some time with you," as she moved toward him. "Oh, all right." The fact that she was getting so close made Izuku uneasy. What did you want to do then? As Mina glanced across the street, she noticed a theater. How about a film? In addition to being the ideal location for them to get a little intimate, she recommended dinner and a show, which are pretty typical dating activities. The boy with the green hair said, yeah, that sounds nice." "Fantastic. Should we?" They started to move across the street. "These look good," Mina said, indicating a couple of seats close to the theater's rear, and she and Izuku walked over and took a seat. Naturally, the two of them had decided to see a movie about heroes, but this one was especially old, having been made before Quirks even came out. Long before Quirks, there had been a number of comics and films about fictional heroes and villains, and if you knew where to look, you could still find plenty of merchandise for them. This movie was being shown in the theater as a special occasion, and it seems that the title character was one of the most well-liked heroes of his era. "Have you ever seen this?" To her surprise, Mina's date shook his head when she asked him. "No. However, I am aware of the character. When these kinds of characters were popular, he was a huge thing." "He doesn't sound all that cool, though. I mean, really, Spider-Man. Couldn't have chosen a name that was a little more imaginative." Mina gave a headshake. "You chose Pinky as your hero name, didn't you?" Mina's face became somewhat magenta. "That was because I was denied my first choice by that dumb Midnight." With her cheeks slightly swollen, she protested, "Besides, it's a work in progress." It was very adorable when Mina was taken by surprise like that, and Izuku tried in vain to contain his laughter. "Right," Izuku said, choosing not to press further. "In any case, where did the moniker, Alien Queen, originate?" Mina turned and met his gaze. "You're not sure?" Izuku gave a headshake. He noticed a brief, ominous expression on her face, as if she had had an epiphany. It didn't sit well with him. "I'll give you an explanation later." All she said was, "It will be more enjoyable to show you." That really irritated Izuku, but before he could ask any more questions, the movie studio's logo appeared and the lights went down. "Oh, it's just getting started," Mina exclaimed with excitement, and Izuku instantly turned his focus to the screen, forgetting the conversation they had just been having. When the film started, the two remained silent, whispering now and then about plot developments, a poor special effect. The film was old, after all, or an actor's performance. Izuku felt something on his hand 20 minutes into the movie, blushing when he realized it was Mina's hand grabbing his again. His instinct told him to pull away, but he chose to listen to the sensation and repositioned his hand so it was holding hers as well, just like at the hospital. Mina shifted, and he turned to see her smiling softly at him. He followed suit, though he thinks his smile was a little more sheepish. After 40 minutes, Mina made the decision to go a step further. She had already eased Izuku into things and felt at ease raising the ante a little. She leaned in and put her head on his shoulder as she edged closer to him. All of her muscles tensed up at once. Mina. He was clearly much more nervous than usual, but she couldn't quite see his face, so she whispered loudly, WH, what AA are you doing? She nuzzled him a little and shushed, SSHH, just let me stay here, okay. She felt him shudder and used her thumb to rub the hand that was holding hers. Having never been this close to a girl before, Izuku was in a panic. Was this really okay? It felt so good, and cozy. Even though he wasn't sure if this was okay, Izuku swallowed and decided that, for the time being at least, he was okay with it. Okay, he said gently, and his hand was gently squeezed in return. Izuku slowly, almost instinctively, lowered his head until it rested on Mina's. More warmth, more niceness. He detected a subtle, sweet scent, maybe from her shampoo. Izuku grinned widely in spite of his flaming face. He nuzzled Mina in a similar manner to how she had nuzzled him, again largely unconsciously, and Mina responded with a gentle, agreeable sound, which only made his face redder and his smile bigger. They stayed this way for the majority of the film, occasionally breaking away during a dramatic scene to allow them to react appropriately, but immediately returning to their positions, Izuku's hesitation gradually fading each time. It had been a very long time since either of them had experienced such joy. Talking passionately about the movie they had just seen, the two of them left the theater. That was incredible. The fact that the villain stabbed himself with his own jet device is unbelievable. Karma, huh? Mina screamed and thrashed her arms. Yeah, Izuku had clearly flinched at that scene. It wasn't like the hero killed him, but it was good that the villain was stopped, and he didn't like seeing people die. But man, what a weird concept, getting a quirk because a weird spider bit you. Technically speaking, it wasn't a quirk. After all, those didn't exist at the time. Izuku had to confess that he felt a genuine connection to the protagonist, a nerdy high school student who was continuously teased suddenly gaining superpowers and being given the opportunity to be a hero. It struck a little too close to home. But still, I mean, can you really imagine if you could just be given a quirk like that? Mina said, waving a hand up and down. What wild concepts. At these words, Izuku halted his stride. You're just so open and honest about yourself. He thought back to what Mina had said a short while ago, when she mentioned that it was one of the qualities she liked best about him and the reason she had accepted this date. Still, she didn't know. He found himself saying, actually, about that. Mina turned to face him. Well, what is it about? Mina had now completely turned around, her face bewildered, and said, the idea that you could be given a quirk it's not so crazy. What's the reason behind that? She raised an eyebrow and cocked her head in question. When he said, because, well, he stopped. He couldn't tell her that, so what the devil was he doing? I just think that there are a lot of different quirks out there. Perhaps there is one that allows you to give them to other people. In a flash, he made up a sentence. She turned around and continued to walk without seeming to suspect anything, saying, I mean, I guess, but it still sounds ridiculous to me. Izuku wiped his forehead with his hand. He hadn't told anyone, not even his mother, about One for All, and he couldn't possibly tell her, no matter how he felt about her. He still didn't feel very good about the fact that he was kind of lying to her about his powers, but he had technically told her the truth, so after a minute or two he was able to get the guilt out of his body. They decided that it was late enough to call it a day, and Izuku agreed to accompany Mina to the train station to say goodbye, but they chose not to show any affection while they were walking. Mina wanted to, of course, but she knew that doing anything in public would make Izuku feel too uncomfortable right now. After a short walk, they reached the station, where Mina would board her train, and the pink girl led him to a spot where no one was around and turned to look at him. The woman put her arms behind her back and said, well, this was fun. Yeah, it was. They both shuffled awkwardly for a moment before continuing to speak. Do you want to repeat this again? Mina stepped a little closer to the boy and asked. Izuku pulled at his collar and said, I would, yes. Would you? Definitely. Both students were flushed, and there was another awkward silence. Mina took another step to bridge the distance between them and said, and, thanks again for all your help today. I'd be open to continuing our studies together. They were barely 6 inches apart, and Izuku swallowed. Yeah, that'd be fine. There was a third, longer silence, and Mina drew closer as they stared at one another, hearts racing. She leaned forward, puckering her lips and slowly closing her eyes. She opened her eyes to discover that Izuku had lowered his head, preventing her from reaching his lips, only to be stopped by a forehead bumping against hers. Sorry, he said softly, but, I don't think I'm ready for that. While the theater hug was one thing, a kiss was quite another, and he didn't feel comfortable going through with it right now. Oh, right, Mina quickly backed up, looking both disappointed and a bit ashamed. Sorry. She went a little too far once more. Izuku scowled. This was not how he wanted their date to end. He stepped forward without saying a word, and he did so almost without thinking, and he pulled Mina in for an embrace, which was still very nerve-wracking for him, but much less so than a kiss. Mina was stunned for a few seconds, then she put her head back on Izuku's shoulder, being careful not to jab at him with her horns. Izuku's body was now entirely covered in the warm, soft sensation he had experienced at the theater. It was a sensation he had never experienced before, and he didn't want to stop. Mina shared this feeling. About a minute later, despite keeping their hands on each other's shoulders, they were forced to part ways when they heard Mina's train begin to pull into the station. A few seconds later, Mina said, "Well, talk to you later," and reluctantly, she moved away from Izuku entirely and boarded the train, waving to each other as the doors closed and the train left the station. Izuku leaned his back against a wall and sighed deeply, still incredulous that he had actually given a girl such a hug. In fact, he was still incredulous of most of the events of the day. Nevertheless, it had all occurred, and he is extremely happy as a result. He had successfully dated Mina Ashido, and based on the exchange, he might be looking forward to another one soon. And maybe another one after that. And, slowly, it came to him. Was he dating someone now? Izuku gripped his head tightly with one hand. In spite of everything that had transpired today, his mind would not accept that idea, and the mere thought of it made him feel lightheaded. Trying not to give the idea any more thought, at least not yet, he began to walk home. Mina opened her bedroom door and threw her backpack on the already cluttered floor before going inside. With a big smile on her face and a spring in her step, she hummed a song to herself. She let out a loud, happy sigh and collapsed onto her bed. After lying there for a while and staring at her ceiling, she grabbed the cute, plush toy of the alien monster from her bed and squeezed it against her chest while rolling back and forth in laughter. This was the best feeling she had experienced since the day she learned she was attending UA. She could still see the blushing, smiling face of Izuku, listen to his cute stuttering, experience the warmth of his arms encircling her. She remembered his sincere remarks about what he saw in her at the ramen shop. She could still clearly recall every detail of that night, and the thought of it made her heart skip a beat. All of her hesitation and doubts about wanting to date Izuku had been dispelled. Despite the awkwardness of their date, it had gone well. Additionally, it sounded as though they were planning to go on another. Her throat tightened with breath. Did that imply that they were now together? Her heart began to race in the enamored girl's chest. She tried to relax by taking several deep breaths. "Easy, Mina, easy," she said, setting down her fat xenomorph and sitting up. She was getting ahead of herself. After all, it had only been one date. One step at a time, girl. Thinking about the future, she started preparing for bed. To be honest, she had not really considered pursuing a serious relationship with Izuku. But now that the two had actually gone on a date, she had to think about it. She thought right away that she wanted one. But she was aware that there were some factors to take into account. First of all, they still hadn't spent much time getting to know one another. Mina was concerned that jumping into a relationship too soon might not be a good idea because everything between them happened so quickly. However, she also believed that she and Izuku had developed a sincere bond. She had noticed it a few times in the last few days, when they would simply look at one another without saying anything. As if they could express their thoughts to one another without using words. Mina felt more than just a typical teenage crush during those times. Of course, calling it love was absurd, but Mina genuinely cared for Izuku. She also sensed that he was equally concerned about her. So perhaps, just possibly, a relationship wasn't such an absurd notion. Mina went back to her bed after completing her preparations. She tried to fall asleep, but her mind kept racing. Naturally, there was no real way to understand Izuku's feelings. She had no idea how uncomfortable and stressful the date had been for him. In addition, he was an extremely committed learner. At this point, would he want a relationship? His life was already crazy enough. The girl moaned with exhaustion. She picked up the phone from her nightstand and sat up. She needed to try to get her thoughts straight, even though she knew this was probably not a good idea. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the call button. Was it really a good idea to ask this kind of question over the phone? Mina's voice was half serious as she said, "Hey Izuku, what's up? Just wanted to know if you're my boyfriend now." Yeah, that's totally the best way to approach this. She knew, however, that this would be bothering her all night. How should I proceed? Her question was answered by her phone buzzing and lighting up. When she saw who it was, her eyes slightly widened. "Izuku," she asked right away, speaking a bit louder than she meant to. His voice made her tingle just by saying, hey, Mina." A moment of silence fell. I know we kinda said it already, but, tea tonight was, really fun." Mina concurred. Yeah, it really was. She wondered if this was the only reason he had called. So, I know we mentioned another date, but, was said after a quiet moment. Mina stopped smiling. Her heart sank. He therefore truly didn't want to. We didn't really talk about when. Those emotions were abruptly replaced by a desire to choke Izuku. Naturally, affectionately. She forced herself not to scream at him for unintentionally playing with her feelings. "Oh, yeah, I guess we didn't, did we?" she said. "I mean, if you still wanted to, but if not, I don't understand." "Izuku, stop," Mina said, pausing long enough to think. "Of course I want to. Are you busy tomorrow?" "Tea tomorrow. So soon?" Izuku squealed. On her bed, Mina rocked back and forth. She began twirling her hair around her finger and said, "I know it's a little abrupt, but I just really want to see you again. But if that doesn't work, I'd love to." Izuku practically screamed as Mina flinched and pulled the phone a few inches from her ear. Mina could imagine how red he must be after that emotional outburst. She swore she could feel the heat radiating through the phone. I mean, why yeah, tea tomorrow would be nice." She laughed aloud. She heard an unintelligible sound coming from Izuku's end, and she said, "You're just too damn cute." Izuku took some time to formulate actual words before asking, "Sue, did you have anything in mind?" Mina rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, well, I figured we could do some more studying tea together." Of course, school word would be a part of his date idea. Still, a few hours of study wouldn't hurt because she had a lot more material to catch up on. "Not exactly the most romantic idea I've ever heard, but sure," she said. "But, I'd rather not spend all day in the library again. Kinda stuffy in there." Mina grinned. She liked the way that said, oh. "Well, the weather's supposed to be nice tomorrow. Maybe we could go to a park or something." She became increasingly excited as she began listing all the possible things they could do together. "Sounds like a great idea. There's a pretty big one near my place, actually. We could study for a while, then go walking on some of the trails. Oh. We could totally have a little picnic. Or maybe," she said. Izuku was barely able to say, yes, that sounds." "Mina, wait, slow down, Mina." She blushed to herself and laughed nervously as she said, "And we could, oh, sorry. Got a bit carried away there. So, park sounds good, yeah. I'll, follow up on a time tomorrow." Mina put the phone down and hung up. "Sounds good. See you then," she said. Lying back in bed, she sighed loudly once more. At this point, she could have inquired about their relationship, but she chose not to. She had a feeling that she and Izuku would come up with a better idea later, so she would wait until tomorrow. As he hung up, Izuku could still feel his own blushing. He had no idea why he had called Mina to inquire about that. I mean, it could have waited until tomorrow. Was it too clingy to inquire about a second date just an hour after the first? Too desperate. All of those things had crossed his mind, but he was unable to stop thinking about it. He already missed Mina's company by the time he arrived home from the station. After arriving home, he immediately went to his room and spent some time sitting in bed reflecting on the events of the day. He still thought it was all a dream. He had made an effort to sleep, but Mina was keeping his mind racing. She had a radiant smile that brightened the entire space, a vivacious laugh that could lift anyone's spirits, stunning eyes that he frequently lost himself in, and soft, fluffy hair that brushed against his cheek. Izuku was a little embarrassed by his own thoughts. At the time, it had been terrifying to be so close to Mina, but now that he was home, he found himself wishing he could touch her once more. All he wanted was to spend more time with her. Even if the girl turned him into a babbling mess at the first sign of affection, he was still completely smitten. He had given her a call in the hopes that it would help him forget about her. Sadly, it was working against him. He hadn't anticipated Mina's desire to meet tomorrow. He wasn't even certain that she would want to meet. But his overly enthusiastic agreement showed that he was more than eager to see her tomorrow. Nevertheless, the fact that this would be a second date remained. If they wanted another, what did that mean? Since the station, he had made an effort to avoid thinking about it, but could this turn into a serious relationship? Izuku trembled. The thought of having a girlfriend had never occurred to him in his life. This was frightening to him because it was possible now. On the other hand, the mere thought of it becoming a reality made him smile foolishly. He gave a yawn. At last, it seemed as though his mind was exhausting itself. He turned over, closed his eyes, and finally fell asleep. Okay. School books, lunch, anything else. Izuku searched his bag 3 times to make sure he had everything he needed. He had to meet Mina in about an hour, and it was around 12 p.m. He had texted Mina after waking up to ask when they could meet. They agreed to meet in the afternoon because they both had morning tasks to complete and their own exercise regimens to follow. Of course he was anxious. He didn't know what a second date would entail. This had been planned, but yesterday had been spontaneous. He was afraid of what Mina would do to him. Izuku went to the door and called, "Mom, I'm heading out." Out. From the other room, his mother's voice called out, "Have fun with your friend. And make sure you don't stay out too late, okay?" Naturally, Izuku hadn't explained to her exactly what he was doing. He didn't want to tell his mother that he was going on a date, but he also didn't like to keep things from her. He wanted to keep her in the dark until he had figured out exactly what he and Mina were to one another. His phone began to vibrate as he left the house. Expecting something from Mina, who had been texting him all morning, usually about unrelated topics, he took it out. He didn't mind. When he recognized who it was from, he stopped moving. "Hey Deku, some of us are going to the beach in around 3, did you want to join?" Uraraka Ochako. Izuku went into a panic. He had neglected his other friends because he had been so preoccupied with Mina. It goes without saying that they would like to spend time with him during the break. He let out a sigh. He wanted to spend today with Mina, but it sounded like fun. Furthermore, he had no intention of trying to get her to this point. He didn't intend to tell his friends what was happening, especially since he wasn't entirely aware of it himself. He didn't want to lie, of course. He would therefore have to give in and tell a partial truth. Although technically correct, "I'm so sorry, but I can't today. I have other plans." Uraraka answered, "Aw sad face, well, maybe some other time this week then." He was so appreciative that she didn't ask for specifics. Yeah, definitely. Of course, he was not yet against the idea. Not today, though. He proceeded toward the train station. For the 4th time in 2 minutes, Mina looked at her phone. 1:02. At the train stop, she sat on a bench and waited impatiently for the next train to arrive. On the previous 2 stops, she had anticipated seeing Izuku, but he had not shown up. She whispered to herself, "Come on, hurry up already." She was so tired of waiting that the morning had sluggishly passed. When Mina explained that she was going to study with a friend, her mother became much more understanding, although she was still a little worried about her going out for the day once more. Since Mina had never lied to her parents, her mother had faith that she would study and not, say, spend her days at an arcade. Additionally, she was officially planning to study with a friend. There was more to the story than that. She needed to see where her relationship with Izuku was truly heading before she could tell her parents about him. She would not hear the end of it from her brother, and she also didn't want him to hear that she had a date. Additionally, Uraraka had texted her to invite her to a beach outing. Mina said she had other things to do, but it sounded like a blast. After all, she had a lot to figure out, and she just wanted to spend today with Izuku. She didn't see the figure approaching her because she was watching the train tracks intently. When Mina turned to face the voice, she saw a familiar head with spiky red hair. "You know you missed a couple trains already, right?" she asked. Her eyes grew a little wider. "Kei Kirishima, what are you? Have you been spying on me?" She raised her eyebrows. Her fellow student raised his hands defensively. Hey, it ain't like that. I just got off a couple trains back and happened to catch you sitting here. I thought it was a bit weird." He glanced over at the tracks. You, waiting for someone or something?" She yelled, "Of course I am, dummy," as she turned to face the tracks. As Kirishima leaned in, she caught a glimpse of his smile. "Dude, I swear." Mina responded by giving him an elbow in the ribs, saying, "It's Midoriya, isn't it?" He appeared to have foreseen this and used his quirk just enough to deflect the blow. Mina couldn't contain her blush for long. "Aha, I knew it." She shouldn't worry so much. He already knew she was going to ask Izuku out, after all. According to her, all right, yes, we're going to study at the park. His voice was full of pride as he said, "Ooh, the park. I see my little plan is paying off. Better than you'd think." Actually, Mina felt that since he had assisted her, he should be aware of this. Kirishima's mouth dropped when she said, "He, actually asked me out yesterday." Mina shrugged and said, "No way. No freakin' seriously. Him. Just like that." She grinned as she recalled last night once more. I couldn't believe it either. We ended up getting dinner and seeing a movie. It was really nice." Her friend from middle school smiled and said, "Like, really nice. I'm, actually meeting him for a second one." Mina became a little tense when this was brought up. "Dude, that's great. So you two are a thing now?" Kirishima looked at her perplexedly and said, "Well, not exactly. I mean, maybe. I don't really know yet." "What do you mean maybe? You guys went on a date, now you're going on another. Sounds like you're a couple to me." He sighed. She sighed as she tried to come up with a way to explain to the redhead, "It's not that simple. Well, the thing is, it's just a lot more nuanced than that." Mina rolled her eyes and said, "I mean, no, it really isn't. Not to me anyway." "That's because you're as dense as they come." The next train's arrival was announced over the loudspeaker before he could reply. "Oh crap, that might be him," she exclaimed as she got to her feet, shoving Kirishima aside. "You need to leave, now. Geez, Mina, just relax. Right now." A few glances were directed at them. He turned to return up the stairs to the station exit. "Okay, I get it, sheesh," Kirishima conceded. "I'll leave you two lovebirds alone then." With a grave expression on her face, she held out a hand with some acid forming in it and said, "Wait, one more thing," turning to face her. "They won't find your body. You understand?" Kirishima just smiled. It was a frightening expression, but he'd known her long enough to know it was a front, and he didn't want to upset her, so he'd keep his mouth shut. He only said, loud and clear, "Ma'am," before heading out. With a half sigh, half groan, Mina wiped her face, realizing that she did not need that at this moment, but she should be thankful that it had been Kirishima because she couldn't imagine trying to explain what was happening to someone who didn't know, especially if she couldn't get rid of them before Izuku arrived, and she knew Kirishima wouldn't tell anyone, at least if he knew what was best for him. Her focus shifted back to the train that was approaching, and she looked from door to door as people began to pour out until she saw a head of green, curly hair in the crowd. She jumped up and down, practically jumping, as she waved frantically to Izuku, who saw her right away. She wasn't hard to spot, after all, and smiled and waved before navigating his way to her through the crowd. "Hey, I apologize for being a little late, Izuku began to apologize for being late, but Mina seized him in a tight embrace, causing his entire body to stiffen. Girl, hugging him, public. Alarms began to go off in his head. However, she was really warm. Mina saw his discomfort at once and with a remorseful smile, she withdrew. "I apologize." Izuku's body relaxed and his face gradually returned to its normal color. "I missed you," she said. I know it sounded ridiculous, since it hadn't even been a day since she last saw him, but it was the truth. Izuku rubbed his arm and looked away a little. "Why yeah, me too," he said, blushing. Shall we leave?" Along the way, they managed to strike up a brief conversation, asking each other how their mornings had gone, and Mina led the way out of the station to the park. Mina had just concluded her tirade about her brother when she said, "I'm seriously going to kill him one of these days." Izuku said, he certainly sounds like a handful," and they took a few more steps. You look nice, by the way," he said softly, blushing a little, and Mina's face did the same, not anticipating the praise. Mina had chosen a slightly more modest outfit for this outing, much to Izuku's appreciation. She wore olive green shorts that hung down to her knees and a slightly loose black top with the word, acid, written in bright pink letters across it. She had purposefully chosen something a little looser for the boy's sake, choosing to give him a break after seeing his reaction yesterday. Izuku, as usual, had chosen a fairly simple outfit, wearing a gray t-shirt and cargo shorts. "Thank you." Mina smiled and gave the compliment back. "So do you." The park was crowded, as was to be expected, but the two teenagers eventually found a tree to sit under with no one nearby. They arrived at the park at 1:30 on a warm summer afternoon that was not too humid, so it was a perfect day to spend outside. They set out to find a place to set up their belongings that was away from other park visitors, both to help them concentrate on their studies and to give them some privacy. Mina remarked, "Oh, this is perfect," as she settled in and leaned against the trunk. "Nice and quiet." "Yeah." Izuku surveyed their surroundings, which included a fairly large park with rolling hills of green with specks of color from flowers and animals, trees that swayed ever so slightly in the gentle breeze, and the sound of birdsong and insects buzzing. "I don't know about you, but I'm feeling quite peckish right now." Mina pulled out her lunch and said, "I'm going to eat before we start any work." Izuku agreed. After eating in relative silence and taking in the serene beauty around them, they decided to start studying. Of course, it went much more smoothly than it had yesterday, though Mina wasn't quite as into it this time. Nevertheless, they were still able to go at a good pace, and after about 45 minutes, they decided to take a brief break. Occasionally, one of them would ask the other about their food or point out something that caught their attention. As she rubbed her forehead, Mina muttered, "Man, this matrix stuff is confusing." According to Izuku, "You're getting the hang of it though, and we just need to keep practicing." "Yes, I am aware of the brain exercises and everything. Doesn't mean it's not tough." Mina sat with her arms around her legs and her chin resting on her knees. "Thanks, by the way." The green-haired boy gave her a perplexed look. "For what purpose?" "For being there for me during this." She repeatedly pounded her fist against her head, saying, "I'm not exactly the smartest tool in the shed, so it's not easy for me to grasp all this stuff. I mean, yesterday didn't exactly get off to a good start, and I feel a lot of other people would have just gotten too frustrated with me to continue. However, you're simply so patient. If you have to explain something to me 5 times in a row, you don't mind." As if to say, "I don't deserve it," she gave him a slight smile that was tinged with sadness. "It can't be easy, and I really appreciate it. Really, it's nothing. I mean, what kind of person would I be if I just gave up on someone in need?" He reassured her. "Besides, I don't think you give yourself enough credit, Mina," he said, giving a thumbs up along with his best all might smile. "I also found it difficult to understand this material. You're much more intelligent than you realize." Mina grinned broadly. "Why do you always have the perfect thing to say?" Izuku pulled at his collar as she scooted closer to him and asked. Well, he shuddered slightly when he felt something familiar on his hand, and when he looked down, he saw that Mina had indeed grabbed it. He gulped and turned back to face her. The two of them looked at one another as they had so many times before, neither of them speaking, and once more, the outside world appeared to. Mina sensed it. Now was the moment to inquire. "Hi, Izuku. Are we, Midoriya, Ashido, is that you?" Mina and Izuku snapped out of their reverie at the sound of a familiar, far-off voice calling out, and their eyes widened as they turned to face the source of the sound. At the moment, Tenya Aida was running in their direction and waving excitedly. Mina must have thought the same thing, because Izuku felt all the color drain from his face and practically screamed as he drew away from her, wanting to put some distance between them. Luckily, Aida was too far away to have noticed how close they had been. "Oh, it's you. I see you're enjoying the pleasant weather." As he approached close enough to speak at a normal volume, normal for Aida, anyway, the Class 1A representative greeted him. Hey, Aida, you why do you come here?" Izuku was so terrified that he was practically trembling. Uraraka did mention you wouldn't be making it because of other plans," he said, pausing. "I was just out for a run before meeting up with some of our classmates later." "I assume this is what she intended." Well, you see," Mina just watched and said nothing as the bespectacled boy briefly glanced at her before turning back to face Izuku. Izuku was frantically trying to find a way out of this situation. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I think it's odd that you two are here by yourselves. How about we meet at the beach? You were both invited, I'm sure." Aida had somehow failed to guess why they were here right away, but he was going to quickly figure it out. Izuku screamed inside. He didn't feel prepared to reveal something like this, but he didn't want to lie to his friend either, so should he just tell the truth? Well, see, Mina and I were. He is assisting me in my studies. Mina chimed in suddenly, leaning in to get Aida's attention. Yeah, the two of them had spent time together that day, and everyone knew it. We just didn't want to get too distracted as all, so we decided to come here on our own. I talked about it with him the day we went to Kiyoshi Ward. Aida stared intently, light bouncing off his glasses, masking his eyes, but Mina and the rest of the class knew he had a deep respect for academics, and they hoped that bringing that up would divert him. Is that correct? You truly are a living example of what it means to be a UA, he said, turning away and stroking his chin. To think you would use your time off to help a fellow student. He turned around again, admiration on his face. Midoriya, student, you were an inspiration to all of us. He turned to look at Izuku's friend. And you, Ashido, studying while on vacation. It's encouraging to see that you value education. I see that your conviction has not been weakened in the least by the outcome of your final. Mina opened her mouth, then shut it, and stared blankly. Did you mean to say that as a compliment? Being selected to represent a class of such students makes me feel incredibly honored. As he clenched a fist in front of his face, Aida appeared to be about to cry. In a technical sense, Izuku had been selected first, Mina thought. All right, I'll let you two go back to work. I'm sorry for disturbing you, the boy with the engine leg said, bowing to his classmates before sprinting back to the path to resume his jog. After he was out of sight, Mina and Izuku sat motionless for a few seconds before letting out a collective sigh of relief, Izuku covering his face with his hands and Mina simply shaking her head with a puzzled expression on her face. Izuku's voice was muffled as he said, thanks. I didn't know what to do. God, don't bring it up. What is he? Mina leaned against the tree. Her date's face was revealed. Trying to defend Aida a bit, he stammered, he's really intense, but, he's a good friend, trust me. I couldn't tell if he was complimenting me or insulting me, Mina said, laughing a little. Like, holy crap, what a character. She turned her head to look at Izuku, who looked just as lost as she did. Aida's intrusion had totally spoiled the mood, and she had lost any drive to bring up their relationship anymore. So, back to work. Izuku gazed at her while holding his hand to his chest and taking a few deep breaths. Sure, just give me a minute. Izuku and Mina's afternoon seemed to go by quickly. They studied for another hour or so before deciding they'd had enough and going outside to enjoy the scenery. They walked around the park, played on a couple of playgrounds, and just sat and enjoyed the scenery together. Mina would occasionally flirt with her date, knowing exactly what to say or do to make him uncomfortable. Later in the day, they went to a nearby American chain restaurant for a quick bite to eat before Mina insisted they go back to the park for one last activity. In the park, the two UA students were strolling along a wooded path that gradually appeared to be going uphill when Mina said she had something spectacular to show Izuku at the top. Given her playful demeanor, he was understandably a little alarmed, but he accepted it. It's not that far, come on. As she spoke, Mina literally jumped with excitement. Looking up at the sky, Izuku reminded her, you said that 20 minutes ago. He was concerned that they would run out of daylight before returning because the sun was beginning to set. Well, this time, I mean it. In fact, as they rounded a bend, Mina stopped and gestured outward with her hands. Behold, as Izuku took in the scene, his mouth fell open. The sun glowed over the horizon as it started its descent, and they had arrived at an overlook that offered a commanding view of the majority of the park and the surrounding city. Wow, isn't that pretty sweet? Izuku gave the pink girl a puzzled look, but Mina smiled as she guided the amazed boy to a massive tree that was growing close by. Here we are. I'm not sure I'm following. I'll see you up there, was all Mina said before she tossed her backpack to the ground, leapt up to catch a large, low tree branch, and hoisted herself up. She stood on it, turning around to face Izuku. Well, you coming? What? Izuku stepped back and cried, why you want me to see climb that? To the summit. The height of the tree was at least 60 feet. Yes, as though she were a monkey, she pulled herself up another branch and said, just follow my lead, I know a good way up it. Mina was not going to let him back out of this situation, even though she knew it would take some persuasion to get him to climb. Isn't that dangerous, but uncertain if the tree would be able to sustain him at some points, Izuku glanced up and down. Dude, I've spent years climbing this bad boy. It's safe, I promise. She didn't mention to her date that she had fallen from this specific tree a few times, but she had, to put it mildly, figured out a safe way up through trial and error. She looked back at the ground as she raised herself up onto a third branch. Please, Mina, you're becoming too arrogant. Izuku was becoming anxious. What if she fell from that height? Well, come get me down then, she teased, sticking her tongue out as she went on her climb. Izuku ran a little in place, unsure of what to do, unsure of whether to use full cowl to jump up and get her, but that was too risky. He would have to hop between a few branches to reach Mina, and that much force hitting the tree might cause her to fall before he reached her, and trying to talk her down was obviously failing. Aware that it was a terrible idea, Izuku took a step back, gained momentum, and leapt for the low tree branch Mina had seized, catching it and slowly climbing on top of it. Hooray, you're done. Mina, who appeared to be waiting for him, called down to him. Now, follow my exact path, and you'll be all right. This is way too dangerous. HNNG. Mina couldn't help but stare as he pulled himself up the second branch, calling up to her, thankful for his strength in the upper body. She wondered what was underneath that shirt of his, but he was much stronger than he appeared. When Izuku reached the top of the third branch, he was confronted by an inverted Mina, who was dangling from the branch above by her legs. Ah, that's really risky, Mina. Come on, let's descend again. With one of her signature smiles, Mina placed her hands behind her head as the terrified boy begged again. Izuku, sheesh, I thought you were all about striving for excellence. She winked and then leaned back slightly before swinging her entire upper body forward in Izuku's direction, bending her body just enough to grab the branch and pulling up so she was sitting on it. Izuku just gaped as he watched the display. Following her, he did his best not to look down, and he had to admit that there was something thrilling about scaling such a big tree. He had never done anything like this as a child, and it was quite thrilling, though it was still terrifying. He finally caught up to Mina, who halted on what looked to be the end of the tree, though it wasn't quite at the top. Izuku could see why she wanted to come up here, even though his face was pale from the fear he was feeling. Near the top of this tree, a group of large branches had created a kind of platform that appeared to be fairly sturdy, and there was enough space for the two of them to sit comfortably with their legs outstretched. Mina had already done so and was motioning for Izuku to join her. Although he was still a little unsteady from being so high up, he was able to find his place. While the view from the tree's base was pleasant, it was simply amazing from this vantage point. Izuku was speechless, feeling absolutely ecstatic. This is, he said. You see, isn't it worth it? And you were anxious, she teasingly said. It's risky even now. Izuku's face heated up as he insisted, and Mina chuckled while cuddling up to him. Well, without a little risk, what would life be? She took hold of his hand and laid her head on his shoulders, just as she had done at the theater the previous evening. Izuku tensed up again but relaxed surprisingly fast, and he laid his head on hers in silence, just like the previous evening. A few clouds had blown in during the day, leaving a streak of pinks, oranges, and reds across the sky, and they sat for a while, taking in the skyline as the sun continued to set, with the only sounds being the rustle of leaves in the wind and the drone of the evening cicadas. Her hair tickled his cheek as she rubbed her head back and forth, a gesture he reciprocated, and Izuku gradually forgot how high up they were and instead concentrated on the sensation of Mina against him, feeling all the same emotions he had in the theater last night, only stronger. It was the moment they had been waiting for, and they both sensed it. Izuku, hi, Mina. When they realized the other had said something, they both felt a knot in their stomachs and pulled their heads away to look at each other. They spoke almost simultaneously. Izuku insisted, why you first, as color rushed to their faces. Well, I wanted to bring this up earlier, before Aida happened, Mina said, casting a sidelong glance down. Izuku noticed that his heart rate was starting to rise. She inhaled and said, well, it's about, well, us. She looked back into his eyes and said, we obviously feel something for each other. And we've already gone on 2 dates. She could see Izuku trembling a little as he said, actually, I was just about to bring this up too. Because, I kind of want to keep doing this. He plucked up the courage to meet her gaze directly and said, I really want to keep seeing you, Mina. Mina's heart felt like it was about to burst from her chest, and a broad smile appeared on her lips. She took his other hand and pulled it in so that their hands were side by side, and her voice was as shaky as Izuku's. So, you Izuku, do you wanna be my, she said. Boyfriend. Izuku let out a high-pitched squeak. Her face was on fire as she said, why, yeah. Izuku nodded enthusiastically after staring wide-eyed as though he didn't believe what he was hearing. Does that mean you want to be my? Yeah, girlfriend. Indeed, I do. Izuku was taken aback for a moment before embracing her with equal fervor. They held each other for a minute or so before parting ways, with each of them grinning at the other with as much brightness as the sun setting in front of them. She squealed with joy as she pulled the red-faced boy into a tender embrace, feeling as though a huge weight had been lifted off her chest. Now what? Mina leaned back against him, resuming her pre-talk stance, and Izuku asked, to which he promptly replied by doing the same. She smiled and said, let's just stay here a while he laid his head on hers. Sounds good. For roughly 5 minutes, they remained silent until Izuku felt Mina shift her weight and turn her head slightly. He felt her lips lightly brush against his cheek, and his eyes felt like they were about to burst out of his head. Mina. Izuku, who now had a tomato face, yelled, WHWH what was? I just thought that would sort of make it official, you know. Squeezing his hand, Mina whispered. Izuku pondered for a few more minutes, taking in the fact that Mina had indeed just kissed him. After a while, Mina experienced a similar change as Izuku moved, and the sensation of lips kissing her cheek made her face light up. Izuku, Mina, a perfect moment for them. They cuddled against each other and watched the sunset together for another hour, reaching across with their outside arms until they were holding both hands between themselves. After a fun but exhausting day at the beach, Oshaka Uraraka yawned as she finished packing up her belongings and was ready to go home. She had spent the afternoon with some of her classmates, such as Aida, Toru, Tsuyu, and Kaminari, and she approached the class representative in question as he was also wrapping up his packing. Aida, this was a lot of fun. She smiled at her classmate and asked. Yes. He paused and said, maybe next time Midoriya and Aida won't be too busy studying to join us. We should do this again before our break ends. As he spoke, Uraraka froze. What did you say? I apologize. Although they hadn't stated it explicitly, both of her friends had indicated that they couldn't visit the beach because of other commitments. Midoriya and Aida, while out for a run in the afternoon, I happened to run into them at the park. He slung a bag over his shoulder and said, I admire their commitment to their education, though it would be nice for them to join us next time we did this. But I didn't want to disturb them for very long because they were in the middle of studying together. As Aida started to leave, Uraraka gazed blankly at the sand, feeling as though a knot in her stomach was being pulled tighter. Together, what were they doing alone? Why didn't they inform her of their actions? And why did she find it so upsetting? Uraraka, will you be there? She shook her head rapidly, ignoring the strange feeling she had just experienced, and looked up when Aida's voice caught her attention. Yes, I just wanted to make sure I didn't overlook anything. Trying to push those thoughts from her mind, she began after Aida. As Mina entered her home, she was on the verge of singing. Even though she had returned home from her date last night feeling good, her current state of mind was far worse. She practically skipped out of the entryway and into the kitchen, kicking off her shoes. The pink girl called out, Mom, I'm home. While she looked in the cabinets for food. Around 8:30, she started to feel a little peckish. She hummed to herself while dancing around the kitchen, twirling and skipping. There were plenty of surprises Mina had expected at UA, but a romantic relationship was not one of them. Of course, she wasn't complaining. Her boyfriend was Izuku Midoriya. Ever since they had spoken on the treetop, that one thought had been circling around in her mind. Even after mentally repeating those words to herself more than 100 times, she was still filled with pure joy. She exclaimed, bursting with joy as the realization struck her once more. A voice said, someone's in a good mood tonight. A woman with eyes like Mina's was standing in the kitchen doorway when she turned around. Mom. Mina's cheeks began to burn. How long were you? The woman winked and said, half a minute or so, but who's counting? It should come as no surprise that Mina resembled her mother. Her hair was naturally curly, just like Mina's, but she wore it shoulder length, unlike her daughter. Mina's mother was also brown-haired, in contrast to her daughter. She actually appeared to be a perfectly normal human being, save for her eyes. No horns, no pink skin, nothing. Oh, Mina shuffled her feet clumsily and then picked up an apple from a bowl beside her. Her mother sounded a little more grave when she asked, "Another late night?" The older woman asked, "You were studying with a friend, right?" In a tone that implied she wasn't entirely sure Mina had been doing that. Mina gave a quick nod. "Yes, I swear," she said in a somewhat frantic tone. Her mother folded her arms. "All right, the horned girl shifted around a little, not knowing how to respond. Is it appropriate for her to simply disclose her new circumstances? She smiled sheepishly and said, "Okay, look, I totally studied with someone today and yesterday. But, MAAAAY have done a few other things too." She wasn't sure whether her mother would be pleased that she had wasted her time playing around rather than focusing on her grades, even though she hadn't been grounded. For a few moments, the brunette fixed her daughter with a severe gaze. She appeared to relax abruptly, placing a hand on her hip and grinning mischievously. "What's his name?" Mina almost dropped her apple, and her eyes widened. She made a few false coughing noises. Her cheeks were turning lilac. "What are you talking about?" she asked. Mina's mother grinned and said, "You're not being very subtle about it, dear. After spending the entire day with a friend, acting like the happiest girl on the planet, you've come home after 2 nights now." She approached the shorter girl and placed a hand on her shoulder. Her smirk transformed into a grin that was strikingly similar to Mina's. "I was your age once, Mina, remember? I know the signs." Mina averted her gaze a little and said, "Besides, I'm your mother, it's my job to know these things, sweetie." The horned girl couldn't help but smile as she called his name, Midoriya. "Izuku Midoriya." Mrs. Ashido tilted her head and asked, "Midoriya? Haven't I heard that name before?" She paused and said, "He's in my class. He was at the sports festival. You know, the guy who fought Endeavor's son." Her mom gasped. "That green-haired boy, the one who almost tore himself apart in that fight." Izuku's heart and tenacity during that fight had astounded Mina's whole family. When she learned that Mina had developed feelings for the boy, she wasn't overly shocked. Mina blushed as she stopped herself from gushing about her boyfriend. "Yeah, he's kinda reckless like that when he wants to be. But he's actually really shy, and super sensitive, and kind, and passionate, and..." Her mother teased, "Sounds like a keeper," she said. After all, Mina got her wit from someone. It was clear that Mrs. Ashido had no problem with her daughter dating. "Well, I certainly look forward to meeting him," she said, "preferably before you leave for camp. No telling what you kids might get up to there." "Mom." Mina's entire face flushed. The woman with the long hair chuckled. She winked and said, "Only kidding, dear." The normal pink hue of her daughter's face gradually returned. "But really, I'd love to have him over sometime this week." "Just say when," she said. Mina's father would return from his trip in roughly 3 days, and she had a feeling it would take at least that long for Izuku to find the courage to come to her house anyhow. "I think I'll wait until Dad gets home this week at least. I'd rather have Izuku meet everyone at once." Her phone buzzed as the Acid Quirk user did. To see who had messaged her, she took it out of her pocket. Her mother asked in a playful tone, "Is that him?" Mina's question was answered by her blush. She said, "Well, I'll stop pestering you about him. For now." And left the kitchen, returning to her task. The brunette walked away, and Mina sighed. Talking about Izuku now had taken her by surprise because she had intended to tell her mother about it tomorrow. She was happy to get it off her chest, though. When her father got home, she would have to tell him. She started typing back to Izuku while biting into her apple. She was eager to continue talking to her green-haired cutie even though their date was over. "Ooh, my little Izuku's growing up so fast." Caught in his mother's embrace, Izuku gasped for air. After arriving home at around 9, the boy chose to tell his mother about Mina after she asked him where he had been. He detested keeping things from her, and he felt much more at ease discussing her now that he knew where he and Mina stood. And he did talk about her. Admittedly, he spoke about her far more than he meant to, but he was unable to control himself once he began. After all, there were a lot of positive things to say about her. As was to be expected, his mother had reacted emotionally. The fact that she was currently holding her son in a death grip and that Izuku's clothing was soaked by the waterworks were proof of this. When Midoriya found out that her son was making friends at UA, she was overjoyed. She was very relieved to hear that his new classmates were treating him well because he hadn't really had any during most of his childhood. However, it was nearly too much for Inko. She was incredibly happy to know that someone out there was concerned about her little Izuku after everything she had witnessed him go through. This gentle girl her son had told about, Mina Ishido, sounded like the most amazing person in the world at the moment. "You need to introduce me soon, got it?" she said, letting go of Izuku while continuing to hold his shoulders. The quirk inheritor caught his breath as she said, "Gee, got it, Mom." He yawned. He had had a very busy day and it was nearly 9:30. His mother nodded and completely released him, saying, "I'm going to head to bed, okay?" She grabbed another tissue to dab at her eyes and said, "Good night, Izuku," as he made his way to his room. "Night, Mom." After brushing his teeth and putting on his pajamas, Izuku was lying in bed a few minutes later. The lights were off, but as he typed, the light from his phone illuminated his face. "Sorry, just finished talking to my mom." "Oh, how did she take it?" "Well, she really wants to meet you now." Izuku had discovered that he was texting his new girlfriend shortly after they had uncomfortably said their goodbyes at the train station. He simply hadn't wanted to stop talking, but he didn't have anything specific he wanted to say to her. Over the past hour and a half, they had discussed a few sporadic subjects. Mina had informed him that she had discussed their relationship with her mother at around 8:30. Or rather, it seems that her mother had discovered that they were dating. In fact, it was this that made Izuku decide to tell his own mother immediately instead of waiting. He would prefer not to be taken by surprise like Mina was. Naturally, it was extremely nerve-wracking. He found it difficult to believe that he now had a girlfriend. Even though his mother's response was expected, it did nothing to ease his anxiety. Nevertheless, he was pleased to hear that both of their mothers seemed to approve of their relationship. Dating. Izuku blushed slightly at the mere mention of the word. It's amazing to consider that only a few months ago, he was wondering if he would make any friends at UA. After all, who would want to date someone like him? The boy had never even considered the idea of being in a relationship. That thought had long since been categorized as impossible in his mind. Izuku believed he had a better chance of becoming a hero than dating someone, even before he was given one for all. The impossible had suddenly become possible, though, just like that faithful day with All Might. To be honest, Izuku was still unsure of how to interpret it completely. Even though he was clearly thrilled to be dating Mina, he still had no idea what he was doing in this kind of situation. After all, he had no prior romantic experience. How could someone become a good boyfriend? It's not as though he could read a book or enroll in classes. He had looked it up, so he should know. If nothing else, he was pretty sure of his feelings for Mina. Everything he had been feeling about Mina over the last few days had intensified. The mere thought of her was enough to make him blush and smile. He sighed contentedly as he gently touched his left cheek, remembering the kiss the pink-haired girl had left there. If nothing else, he would make an effort to be the greatest boyfriend he could be. Mina was worthy of no less. He typed another message to the girl, his fingers still moving. Despite his fatigue, he was unable to stop texting her. Izuku was sound asleep a few hours later, with a message partially typed on the screen and his phone still firmly grasped in his hand. The sensation of taking a shower after a strenuous workout never grew old to Izuku. The hot, steaming water was very soothing after working out and feeling exhausted and sore. Even though he only needed 5 to 10 minutes to get clean, he would occasionally stay under the water for almost an hour because it felt so good. He might start singing if he was feeling especially upbeat, but only if he was positive his mother wasn't home. That was not the case today. After deciding that he had been soaking for too long, the green-haired boy exited the shower. He inhaled deeply, enjoying the clean, crisp feeling that came after being soaked in perspiration. After a few minutes, he was dressed and dried off, prepared to face the remainder of the day. Izuku would typically be out of bed and finished his morning workout by 10 or 11 on his days off from school, so it was unusually late. It was around 1 o'clock. However, because he had stayed up much later than usual, the would-be hero had a bit of a late start today. This, of course, was Mina's fault. Last night, they ended up texting each other for hours. Izuku actually had no idea what time he went to sleep. He only knew that he had been so exhausted that he had actually fainted while typing a message. It was the longest conversation he had ever had, text or otherwise. It was difficult to recall what they had even discussed in retrospect because they had covered so much ground that everything seemed to fit together. They talked about heroes, school, their friends, each other, hobbies, and everything else for a long time. Izuku spent much of it half asleep, which may be why he was having so much difficulty recalling things. Actually, he couldn't remember if they had any plans for today. He started looking through the very long list of messages he and Mina had exchanged as he left his room and entered the hallway. Though no specific plans were made, it appeared that the subject came up at some point. However, Izuku became curious after one text exchange. Mina had asked, "You gonna be home tomorrow?" "I think so. I don't really have anything planned beyond my morning routine." "Cool." She just changed the topic when he asked her why. Before he could continue to wonder about the mysterious conversation, there was a knock on the door. Inko called out from the kitchen, "Izuku, could you get that please?" Izuku walked to the door and looked through the peephole, but there was no one there. He opened the door, thinking it might be a package being dropped off or something. In a matter of seconds, a pink blur practically tackled him as it came hurtling around the corner. It was a moment before he realized who it was. Those texts suddenly made sense. Mina's happy voice called out, "Hiya, Izu." As she ensnared her boyfriend, Izuku's mind went crazy. Mina had arrived at his residence. He fought against her hold for a moment before she let go, saying, what are you doing here?" She had her school bag with her, and she was dressed pretty much the same as she had been yesterday. The woman was beaming broadly. "Well, that's a silly question. I'm here to see you, duh," she said. Izuku's whole face was dark red and he was trembling. Mina made an ostentatious pouty face. "What, you're not happy to see me?" No. Of course I am," Izuku exclaimed, grinning in spite of his intense nervousness. I just, how did you even find my apartment?" She nudged his chest and said, "You, dummy. You told me your address last night, remember?" Mina asked, bringing up the relevant message on her phone. "See?" Izuku asked, blinking several times to confirm his interpretation. As it turned out, he did send his address to the pink girl. "It's late at night. I always have trouble with these sorts of places. Ended up knocking on the wrong door, like 3 times before this." Izuku assembled it in a flash. The sly girl put her hands behind her back and looked up, whistling. "Why, you purposefully waited until it was late to ask me this, didn't you?" "Maybe," she confessed, grinning mischievously at the boy. Izuku sighed in frustration. He was going to go crazy over this girl. "Well." Mina placed a hand on her hip and asked, "What?" As if it were the most obvious thing in the world, she raised an eyebrow and asked, "Aren't you going to invite your girlfriend inside?" The word, girlfriend, alone made Izuku feel as though he was about to pass out. Oh, alright, please, won't you come in?" He almost stumbled as he moved to make room for his visitor to enter and waved an arm inside. While tussling her boyfriend's head with the green mop, Mina laughed. As she walked in, she only said, "So cute." This line and gesture, of course, made Izuku a stuttering beat. When a third voice entered the discussion, it only got worse. Both students turned to see Inko Midoriya standing in the hallway, her hands over her mouth, staring at Mina with wide eyes. "Izuku, who's at the?" they asked. The girl mentioned above smiled as she always does. She exclaimed, "Hiya, you must be Mrs. Midoriya. I'm Mina Ashido." After responding with a hushed squeal of delight, the older woman drew Mina into an embrace. "Whoa!" she exclaimed, "it's so good to meet you." And then let go of the struggling girl. She was speaking with tears in her eyes. "My son had so much to say about you last night." "Oh?" Mina asked, turning to face Izuku, who was now attempting to conceal his face. "Really? Like what?" she asked, smirking as she observed the agitated boy's wriggling. Mom," Izuku squawked, "more or less. Can we talk about that later please?" Inko chose to comply after noticing her son's embarrassment. "I must say I'm surprised to be meeting you so soon though. I thought Izuku would have told me you were coming over." The girl rubbed the back of her head and said, "Well, he didn't exactly know. I kinda wanted to surprise him. Sorry if I'm being a pain." Mina's eyes glistened with pleasure as she said, "Nonsense. In fact, I was just about to make lunch for us. Would you like to join?" The woman grinned at the horny girl and said, "Really? Thanks, Mrs. Midoriya. I'd love to," she said, Right this way then. As she made her way back into the kitchen. When they were alone, Mina turned back to Izuku. Dude, your mom's amazing. Apparently, Mina was easily won over with free food. She gave him a back pat and teased, I can see why you're such an emotional sweetheart now, she said. Izuku whispered, haha, thanks, instead. He was still not entirely over Mina being in his house. Actually, he wasn't sure if he was comfortable with the idea. Naturally, he was happy to see Mina because, in all honesty, she had been on his mind constantly for the past few days. However, he also felt that this was a bit too personal. Izuku had hoped that once they had made the decision to become a couple, their relationship would have slowed down, but it had developed incredibly quickly. Since they were still trying to figure out their feelings, things had gotten so out of hand that it almost felt unnatural for Izuku to move so fast. Neither Mina nor he had any prior romantic relationship experience. Mina acknowledged that she occasionally flirted and had a few crushes, but she had never approached a committed relationship. They appeared to be going in different directions and were both quite out of their element. Mina's voice said, Izu. Izuku shook himself out of his reverie, realizing that he was most likely standing there mumbling all of this to himself. Sorry, he forced himself to relax a little by clearing his throat. I see you have your school-s stuff, did you want to do some studying after lunch? He didn't like Mina's tone when she said, that was the idea. Unless you had something else in mind. As his blush returned, Izuku made what sounded like a distressed bird call, I mean, with your mom home I don't think, which caused his girlfriend to giggle once more. She took hold of the human tomato's arm and dragged him toward what she thought was the kitchen, saying, kidding. Now come on, I feel bad not helping your mom if she's gonna feed us. Izuku let out a sigh to himself. He would soon have to discuss his worries with Mina. Izuku was a wonderful man for many reasons, and Mina could add, having an awesome mom, to the list. The cheerful pink girl who had chosen to come to her house instantly won Mrs. Midoriya over. Mina spent most of their lunch conversing with Inko, even though she had come to see Izuku. The girlfriend was more than willing to comply with the woman's request for detailed information about her son's girlfriend. In turn, Mina discovered a great deal more about Izuku's family life, including some extremely embarrassing tales that only a mother could be aware of. Izuku had first objected to his mother sharing this information, but he quickly accepted the mockery Mina would almost certainly inflict on him later. To Mina's dismay, he did object when his mother displayed pictures of the baby. Mina and Izuku made the decision to settle down and start studying after lunch was over and the dishes were all put away. Mina demanded to see her boyfriend's room first, though. As she raised the topic, Izuku stumbled, is that really necessary? I mean, we could just study right here, or on the couch. As the horned girl complained, but I wanna see your room. She pretended to gasp in surprise and said, come on, what's the big deal? Knowing exactly where she was going with this, Izuku opened his mouth to say, unless, you've got something you don't want me to see. Are you hiding something naughty, Izu? No. The boy with the green hair cried, his face blazing. He hung his head and sighed deeply, knowing full well that his girlfriend was just making fun of him once more. It's nothing like that. I wouldn't. I don't, he said. You're not going to stop unless I show you, are you? Nope, Mina reassured him, her eyes closed and a toothy smile on her face. She was enjoying all of this too much. Alright, fine. Izuku wasn't sure how much longer he could put up with Mina's antics, but he was pretty sure this was a big mistake. Also, why are you calling me, Izu, now? Izuku's face turned at least 8 different shades of red in less than a second after hearing the words, because it suits you. It's short and cute, just like you. And receiving an embrace, he felt that warm, fuzzy feeling in his chest again, and he couldn't help but smile. A part of him was enjoying Mina's unexpected visit even though he may not have been entirely at ease with it. After all, Mina was important to him, and every hint of flirtation served as a reminder that she felt the same way about him. That's why he didn't ask her to stop, even though it made him look uncomfortable. He remarked, hey wait, I'm taller than you though, he seemed to go unheard. Izuku led his companion back to the entry hall and to the door of his bedroom after they had left the dining room table. Mina suppressed a chuckle at the door's All Might themed sign. He inhaled deeply before grudgingly turning the doorknob. He opened the door slowly while clamping his eyes shut. He hesitated for a few seconds before opening one eye. Mina had a huge smile on her face as she stared at him. She shook her head, saying, "Dude, you are such a fanboy. Posters of All Might adorn each wall. There are All Might action figures on each table, desk, and drawer. The shelves are overflowing with All Might comics. In fact, the floor was covered in an All Might rug." Honestly, Mina wasn't shocked. Izuku struggled to come up with a sentence. I know, it's weird, he knew that his obsession with All Might could appear unhealthy. Upon entering Izuku's room, the pink girl exclaimed, "Weird. You kidding? It's super cool," as she marveled at the assortment of merchandise. One figure was still in its box, and she noted, "Some of this stuff looks really old, must have been tough to find. Hey, I think I recognize that. Isn't it, like, super rare?" Yes, it was a limited edition kind of thing made for a comic. There were only 100 made, Izuku said as he entered his room. As he saw Mina's blank expression, he trailed off. "See, it's the costume he wore during Astonishing All Might number 84 in that one flashback scene on the 32nd page, and, yeah, it's a really rare figure." Whispering, "Fonbui," Mina said. She looked at the weights that were hidden in the room's corner. "Ooh." As he was speaking, Mina approached the weights and said, "Well, a hero needs to stay in shape, right? Holy crap, 25 pounds. She exclaimed, looking one over and grinning mischievously back at Izuku. Her boyfriend became a blubbering mess the moment she raised her eyebrows and asked, "Just what have you got hiding under that shirt, Izu?" She approached the boy, who was naturally flushed, slowly, feeling even more flirtatious than usual. "What are you doing?" He was so agitated that he was unable to complete his question. She winked and said, "Come on, let me just take a peek." Although the flirt didn't really intend to force Izuku to remove his shirt, she found it hilarious to play with him in this way, and she wouldn't mind getting a look because she had a feeling she would like what she saw. Hua. The blushing boy's vocabulary had stopped being coherent, and Mina drew nearer as he struggled to comprehend what in the world was happening. "Take a quick look, would you please be pretty?" She spoke softly because the distance between them was now only a few inches, and her heart was beginning to race. She ignored the voice in the back of her mind that told her to stop. We ought to. Izuku's heart rate was rising, and his breathing was getting faster. "What should we do? You and I, alone in your room, what should we do?" She said with a devilish smile. She inclined closer. And was immediately pushed back. "Mina, quit." Both students were momentarily stunned by this sudden outburst, but Izuku recovered first, looking a little regretful. I'm sorry." He paused to let out a loud sigh. He found it hard to find the right words. "Look, this is all a bit too much for me," he began. Don't you think we're moving a little too fast? We just started dating, and you're already showing up at my home, in my room, and," Mina's expression changed from one of shock to one of solemnity as he spoke. "Stop." His girlfriend raised a hand to signal him to stop talking, and she sighed as well, her shoulders drooping slightly. I understand." When she looked back, Mina was shocked that she hadn't anticipated this. She had planned her little plan to arrive at Izuku's house unexpectedly last night, and she hadn't even considered how he might react. She knew he would become a blubbering tomato man, but she had been so excited about having a boyfriend that she had completely forgotten to take his feelings into account. She was so enamored of the boy that it had partially blinded her. Izuku had been even more awkward than usual the entire time, and not in a good way. Looking back, he had looked utterly uncomfortable. How had she missed that? She felt foolish for not seeing the signs. She had been behaving more like Izuku than a boyfriend. Had her little stunt ruined their relationship? Izuku shook his head, and Mina honestly felt a little disgusted with herself. I'll just head home, if you want." He began. "No, it's all right, really," not intending to offend her. No, it isn't. You're right, I did go a little too far." Once more, she started to walk away, but was stopped by a hand snatching her shoulder. Please wait, Mina," Izuku's begging voice said. I'm not saying I don't appreciate it." The girl looked at him, perplexed, and said, I know you're just doing all this because you care about me." His eyes moved down as he said this, a faint smile and blush creeping on his face. "And that means so much to me." But, he glanced back up at his girlfriend, who had now completely turned around. I'm just worried that if we take things too far too soon, he trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought. His words appeared to lift Mina's spirits a little, and she put a hand over the one on her shoulder and gently ran her thumb along it. She chuckled quietly and shook her head slowly, saying, "Yeah, I get it. You're so damn logical, you know." Izuku's face lit up shyly as he averted his gaze a little. "All right, she said, pausing, "we'll just take it nice and slow." Her smile was soft and kind. "You know, it's kind of like a candle." As Izuku spoke, Mina arched an eyebrow. "Like, if it burns too much too quickly, it runs out. But if you keep it under control, it lasts." And Mina couldn't help but laugh when the green-haired boy covered his face with his free hand after realizing how absurd that had just sounded. "Dude, why do you always make such strange comparisons?" She jokingly pulled him into another hug, which was much softer than the others and one that Izuku found himself okay with. "Our relationship is a candle, you dork." Her boyfriend remained silent, just finishing the embrace, and after a few seconds of holding her, he felt compelled to express his gratitude for the girl even more. He turned his head and gave her a quick peck on the cheek before he realized it. Mina gave the now red-faced boy a sly glance and pulled away a little. "Mister, let's slow things down. What was that?" Izuku averted her eyes. "Well, it just felt right." She leaned in and gave the boy a slightly longer kiss on the cheek, saying, "Well then, if you get to do that, I get to do this." The heat radiating from his face was palpable to her. Despite the fact that there was nothing particularly funny about the situation, they both had butterflies in their stomachs as they looked at each other, and Mina began to laugh without any apparent reason, followed by Izuku. Mina suggested, Okay, maybe we can at least try to get some studying in now." After they had calmed down. "Let's go back out to the oop." Hold on. The acid quirk user was distracted by the vibration of her phone and checked it, saying, Looks like my friends are meeting up for something." She looked back up at Izuku, smiling, and said, "But I should really study." The boy's answer was a little unexpected. "Actually, I think you should go with them." "What?" Mina gave a few blinks. "Well, yesterday we both kind of blew off our friends." Mina tilted her head, thinking, "Actually, we've kind of been doing nothing but seeing each other for the last few days." Izuku rubbed the back of his head. Maybe that's why things escalated so much." "Oh man, you're right. She hadn't actually spent time with her friends in a while." Oh, I am aware. You should definitely accompany me." Her boyfriend was totally unprepared for the suggestion. "See return. Yes, I assume you haven't had a chance to get to know any of them." "Suyu, perhaps, but not the others. Furthermore, perhaps spending time with others will help us out a little." As Izuku mentioned, Mina may not have given much thought to how quickly their relationship was developing because they had been spending the majority of their free time together alone for the previous few days. It sounded like fun, and his girlfriend had a point about how it would benefit their relationship, but Izuku was conflicted because it meant they would have to tell her friends about their relationship, unless they made an effort to hide it, which he doubted they could do even if they did. He had told his mother, but that was a little different from what he had told his classmates, but then again, they were Mina's friends, so they had a right to know, didn't they? Besides, the entire class would inevitably find out somehow, so at least this way he could control when some of them found out. It was also a good excuse to speak with more of his classmates. At last, he said, "Yeah, sounds good," and Mina smiled. "Excellent, I'll inform them of your arrival." "Wait," she began typing, "unless you don't want me to." Izuku gave a headshake. "I'd rather they know ahead of time." In reality, Izuku didn't like either scenario. Her friends would either spend time speculating about what they were doing together before they arrived or would barrage them with inquiries when Izuku showed up out of the blue. However, he would prefer not to be put in a difficult situation. But he was happy Mina had asked. "You got it." The pink-haired girl gestured for Izuku to follow her to the door, and they left the room, putting on their shoes in the foyer. "Well, let's get moving then. Mina and I are going to meet up with some friends, Mom." Izuku yelled. "All right, enjoy yourselves, you two. And feel free to come by anytime, Mina," Inko said, emerging from the kitchen doorway. "Here, you're always welcome." "You succeeded, Mrs. M. Once more, thank you for lunch." She waved goodbye to the woman as she and Izuku headed out the door. She turned to him as they made their way to the exit of the complex. "Seriously, dude, best." Mom, never. After a moment, Izuku said, she's really amazing, yeah. She really liked you. Just promise me you'll let me know next time you come over. Mina extended her little finger and held up a hand. Her companion stared at the finger for a moment before realizing what he was supposed to do, and then he held his own pinky out and they locked together. For now, anyway, she added with a wink. Pinky promise. She appeared rather proud of her double entendre. They went on their way.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, bye bye.